Today, we are gonna see. What if Naruto had lustful eyes on Goddess Anabeth? Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. The moment it hit, Jiraiya knew the impact would be crushing. The power of an erupting volcano behind a single strike. The very fact that his student could improve this much in such a short time was staggering, and honestly, it was starting to take a toll on the master. Jiraiya of the Sannin, a man of unquestionable strength and indomitable will, was launched backwards as a fist coated in silver slammed into his gut. He didn't have time to react to the punch. It came so fast that he could barely realize it was coming before his muscles tensed for the blow. And what a blow it was. An observer would have sworn that he teleported backwards, hitting a low cliffside behind him with the force of a giant's left hook. The ground behind him cratered as the stone absorbed the excess energy from the attack. Immediately he caught his bearing, 40 years of battles dragging him back from the brink of unconsciousness before he even registered the dark closing in. And he was blasting forward, chakra pumping through ravaged muscles. He was upon his student in a flash, their eyes meeting. Blue-slitted eyes met dark pupils. Good. You're even stronger now, even faster. Let's see how far I can push you. I'll use every ounce of strength I have. Naruto. Wham! Their fists met with a crunch and a grind, their feral gazes locked on one another, unable to be torn away. Eat this, old man. The dark purring voice came like a bloody whip lash across his face as 10 strikes battered into him in less time than it took to blink. Jiraiya exhaled crimson as the stone around him was shredded by a wild wind. Wind styly. Fury of the western wind. A scream. Like 100 banshees rent his eardrums in two as a blast came. From the west. Blades of wind falling around him like razor-edged meteors. Fire style. Infernal armor. Jiraiya activated his newest jutsu and flung himself headlong into the rain of death, pursuing his student as he bent the currents of air around him, flexible serpents that could shear though diamonds as a sharp blade through flesh. He felt the battering ram impact of the attack like dozens of burning cuts across every part of him. He slammed into his student, even as the boy barked out a laugh. Wind style. Maelstrom convergence. Jiraiya's eyes widened at the unfamiliar technique. Could this be the jutsu he told me of last week that he couldn't quite get right? He growled out a curse as he kicked out at his opponent, launching himself away, only to feel the world around him compress. It was as if he was in an ever-shrinking dome of wind, but the barrier was made of blades. Damn! He whirled and flashed through dozens of hand seals. Fire style. Twin serpents, Elder's exhalation. He drew in a great breath and then blew, his breath leaving him as 2 streams of pure white fire. They twisted and rose high, brushing the edges of the wind dome, and consumed it, the cutting winds feeding their power and sending them crashing around the dome. Jiraiya formed a constant chain of hand seals to direct their direction, and saw the clawed hands of his student in the center. Oh shit. Naruto never uses hand seals. If he's doing it now, he's pulling out something huge. Squinting his eyes against the growing inferno, he separated his hands and made hand seals separately, directing each dragon individually. They soared high, skimming the edges of the dome and circled. Each of them leveled off on the ground, their jaws open to consume their target, the space between top and bottom wide enough to fit a tree inside. A second before they connected in the middle with Naruto between the jutsu was roared out over the burning serpentine dragons and the shrieking wind dome. Wind style. Perfect implosion, self-destructing vortex. The dome compressed, causing the dragons to become even more bloated as they crashed together around the solitary figure, and then the entire dome exploded, the shockwave leveling everything for 300 feet and extinguishing the twin fire dragons instantly. Jiraiya found himself tossed like a rag doll in a hurricane, tumbling across the ground out of control as his burning armor was quenched by the gale force winds. The cliff didn't stop his movement this time, the previous blast having reduced it to a small hill of shattered stone. He crashed through it, coming out the other side bruised and battered. Chakra bled from his skin as he frantically tried to stabilize himself and slow his headlong tumble. He succeeded and landed on his feet, still skidding backwards. The Sannin caught his balance just in time to deflect a horizontal rain of shuriken. It stopped quickly, catching him off guard before he heard the familiar shrieking hum of his student's favorite jutsu. Giant Rasengan. Jiraiya grabbed the extended wrist, twisting it. The body turned with the wrist and Jiraiya received a devastating kick to the side of his head, Naruto's entire body contorting around at an impossible angle to land the hit. Jiraiya was forced back again as he was surrounded on three sides. He lashed out quickly, snapping, kicking the blonde figure in his front as he ducked under another violently spinning ball of chakra. The attack plunged into the third attacker just as he planted his fingertips into the second's chest. All three exploded into smoke as he spun in the air and palmed the ground with one hand. He pulsed his chakra into the ground and rocketed upwards into the air, already going through a new chain of hand seals. The blonde was gone. Snap! An armored heel crashed down on the back of his head, sending him to the ground like a comet. Jiraiya landed, his body almost shattered. Like glass by the force behind those last two kicks. He rose again, his legendary endurance bringing him to his feet without effort. He caught the fist aimed at his head. His other hand knocked aside the jab for his throat. His knee blocked the one lifting to his gut. Jiraiya snapped his head forward into his opponent's. Their eyes met again as his student imitated the action perfectly. Ready to give up, old man? As if I'd ever surrender to an ungrateful brat like you. Naruto growled and his voice was a tremor running through the ground. Jiraiya felt the muscles in his student flex through his fists. Then I'll show you my power again. The head drew back and lashed out 3 times. Smack. Smack. Crack. Jiraiya reeled backwards, his face bloody and his mind dazed. He settled into his best defensive stance as thick red liquid blinded him to his adversary's moves. He blocked the first attack by pure reflex. The second one the same as the first. The third landed square in the center of his chest, throwing him back a step. He rushed forward blindly, sending fire-laced chakra bursting through his muscles, and he became a blazing juggernaut fighting like a wild brawler. Blows rained down on him and were ignored as insolent jabs. He rained down his own, each attack a surge of heat, every blow a blast of superheated wind. Then he felt it, the crushing power that hit him from the right. The blood covering his eyes burned and flaked away in the face of the crimson torrent. Jiraiya's eyes showed his enemy in a blurry crimson haze. The beast that was his student swung, his red-coated hand catching him a glancing blow to the shoulder. He let out his first cry, a howl of pain as the bones shattered like glass and the burning chakra devoured his flesh. He turned, spinning in place with the force of the strike, and shoved chakra into his legs, leaping over the creature's charge. A crater boomed into existence behind him and he landed hard behind his student. He grinned a dead man's grin and watched as the creature, wreathed in violent swirling chakra, tuned to regard him. 5 tails of purest deepest red scorched the air clean with their very presence. Time to end this. Jiraiya shot forward. The demon grinned as well, ducking to the side. The blue eyes were now a red that more than matched its crimson cloak. Too slow, old man. Can't you count? This is 5 now. Jiraiya snarled and turned flashing forward in a burst of speed that almost caught the beast off guard. Almost, he missed again and the beast casually swatted him to the side. The impact was gargantuan. Jiraiya didn't feel himself crash though half a forest before a convenient boulder stopped him cold. His body was broken and the chakra that ate at his every wound had cauterized his nervous system. He was numb, but at the same time knew he was burning alive from the inside. You done yet? I could go all day like this. Jiraiya barely moved his head, coughing up enough breath to speak the 2 words he needed. Seal, release. OWWW. Hold still, damn it. Let me get the toad oil on it. That stings, old man. Get that shit away from me. I'll heal fine without it. And you'll scar like an old prune. Youch. 1 hour later. Jiraiya sat, sullen but victorious, feeling a hostile glare leveled on him by his student. You could have just let me heal, ya no. Naruto growled. Now my skin is going to be all itchy and sensitive for the next month. I swear you keep that stuff on hand just to make me miserable every time I get control of a new tail. You whine too much. With the pain I'm in you have nothing to complain about. Says the guy who bemoans the fact that he hasn't gotten laid in his life. Naruto pointed his finger at him accusingly, the appendage scraped in gauze. You're probably the whiniest person I know, and I had to train with Sakura under Kakashi. Do you know how much she complained on a daily basis? Jiraiya sighed and turned away from the enraged blonde. Get over it. This way we can get back to your training faster. I want to get you as strong as possible before I have to hand you back over to Tsunade. You know she's going to keep you locked away in the village from every conceivable threat. Probably until the Akatsuki come knocking on the village gate. He looked up at the sky as it turned darkened, heralding night's coming. We only have another 2 months and there's one more agent I need to meet with before we return to Konoha. Naruto lowered his hand and grumbled. You and your agents. I swear if this new agent turns out to be a prostitute that you like in the land of who knows what, I am going to achieve 6 tails transformation just so I can kick your ass for good. Yeah. Jiraiya glanced back at his student as he twisted back to their camp's fire. It's actually important that I meet with her. I haven't seen her in 10 years and I sent her on a rather important assignment that's been in the works since you were a toddler. Naruto perked up. Huh, so this isn't a bullshit visit? Cool. So who is this girl's mission? Jiraiya shrugged. Originally her job was to prevent Kiri and Kumo from trading by sea using any means necessary. This was during the days after they teamed up to destroy Uzushiogakure. But as she was doing her job she kept encountering odd vessels the further out she went into the Eastern Sea. Eventually she started to take log of them and came to the conclusion that they were part of a sea trade route. However, it couldn't have been Kumo or Kiri at that time because shortly before that they became enemies. She, correctly, assumed they were part of another nation, unknown to the elemental lands. Cool. So there's like a whole other continent out there. Why didn't you ever tell us that was our last stop before? Because, Jiraiya said smirking. You would never have stopped pestering me until I took you there and our appointment isn't for a week, which is exactly how long it should take us to reach the east shore of the Land of Fire. Now shut up. Stop wasting energy talking and heal. It should only be a day and we can take off those bandages and get on the road. It's a straight shot east from here. Come on. I just got access to Five Tails State. Let me do some ninjutsu training before we leave this spot. Then we can go over in. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. Need I remind you that I almost died? Again? Naruto crossed his arms. You're always almost dying. It's like your hobby. Naruto grinned, showing off his semi-sharp teeth and long canines. You forget? I'm the only reason you're as strong as you are now anyway. Weren't you the one who said that shinobi grow stronger by being brought to the brink repeatedly? True, but, and what is dying a few times compared to sparring with your favorite student and, only godson? Naruto seemed to glow with, admittedly sarcastic, pride. So what if I've almost killed you 25 times in the last 2 years? It's all about the bond, right? Not 25, the tally of near-death experiences is almost double that, or did you forget the 3 months after you breached the Three Tails barrier? You have nearly killed me a grand total of 39 times? Oh yeah. Only 11 more to go and we'll hit 50. He deadpanned. Please don't be excited about that. Naruto lowered his arms and dropped his stupid grin. But seriously, I have complete control of Three Tails now and I can reach Five Tails Cloak in a pinch, without turning into a homicidal maniac. I used to go batshit crazy at 2. That is a good point, but full control over Three Tails? That is only 1/3 of the total number. And the amount of power you gain with each new tail is exponential. The first tail doubled your usual power and you never ran out of chakra. The second tail was doubled that as well, putting you well above Chunin level, if not quite Jonin level. Then the third tail tripled that, putting you on par and even exceeding my power at the time. Which was when you wanted to quit. Naruto muttered. Which was when I wanted to quit. He admitted, but now it is getting completely ridiculous. If by my measures, the 4 tails will give you full access to power easily on par with a cage, 5 tails, which you just managed to briefly harness today, could give you the power needed to butcher some of the most powerful individuals in the world. Jiraiya seemed to shiver at the thought. I hesitate to imagine how much power you could have by fully mastering 6 of the 9 tails. They were both silent at that. Jiraiya personally was frightened at the god-like power Naruto could easily wield in the future, but at the same time, ecstatic that he was the one training him to use it. Of course he himself was far more powerful than he'd ever been before, training every day for 2 years with, quite possibly, the most dangerous and unpredictable ninja alive. To put it bluntly, he improved rapidly. Not nearly as fast as Naruto did, but still, he felt that he could have gone toe-to-toe with Hanzo. And that was something he'd once been unfortunate enough to fail at, even with the help of his old teammates. Naruto, on the other hand, he changed, drastically. Gone was the immature boy of 13 who would rush headlong into a fight, completely and utterly unprepared for anything. He was still immature in some ways, retaining the devil-may-care attitude and complete disregard for authority, or his own skin. He still rushed headlong into conflict, but he was no longer unprepared for it. Seeing how he was undoubtedly high Jonin level now, just with sheer power. That wasn't counting his keen mind. Oh yeah, he had one of those now. He would never be called an idiot again. Jiraiya would personally hamstring anyone who considered his godson anything less than a genius. For example, he mastered jutsu so fast that it made his head spin. Shadow clones, an A-rank jutsu in a single night. Rasengan. A week without any real hints or direction. Mastery over wind manipulation in 2 weeks, not just cutting a leaf in half. Not just cutting a piddly little waterfall in half. Naruto could cut a huge boulder in half just by putting his palm against it. That was mastery, and that was only a small part of why Naruto was a mastermind. The kid could come up with a solution for anything. No matter what the problem was, he could find some way to fix it, in the most bizarre, unconventional way you could imagine. Things that no remotely sane person could think of. The kid was also a genius when it came to inventing jutsu, and, if he did say so himself, far better than his father at naming them. And some of them, geez. He outdid himself regularly. Out of his arsenal of 20 wind-style jutsu, not a single one was below A rank. 6 were S rank. Their chakra costs were unreal, and the fact that he could do more than half with no hand seals. He was deadly. Now Naruto, he could have thrashed Hanzo while using the Five Tails cloak. As for his general maturity, he'd improved greatly. He still spoke his mind without care, but he wasn't clueless anymore. He understood how things worked in the world. He did embarrass himself sometimes, but these days that was usually because he fudged a jutsu and blew himself up. Jiraiya might have thought that he'd been hopeless when it came to girls, but he wasn't. Not that he was a playboy in any way. He just tended to ignore the fairer sex, thinking that they were far more trouble than they were worth. Not exactly a golden development for his novels, but Naruto, thank Kami-sama, still had a tendency to find himself in situations. Well, sometimes might have been an understatement. To tell the truth, it was at least once a month. But he never got in trouble for it, for some reason. How he hated that. Jiraiya felt a smile tracing across his lips again as he turned to look at his godson. Naruto was taller now, having gained quite a bit during the trip, though he was still way under his own towering height. His skin was a slightly deeper tan and his muscles were powerful but sleek. His definition would make any self-respecting woman swoon if he took his shirt off. He was fond of saying that he'd be even more handsome than his father had been said to be. And seeing how Minato Namikaze could have easily had a harem by 17, well, that might not have been a bad thing. At the very least he'd get plenty of writing material. Naruto's most marked appearance was in his face, which his rigorous training had shaved of any baby fat. In fact, Naruto was even more fit than him in that regard. Basically all he did was train, and the Kyuubi already boosted his metabolism to an insane degree. But that only made him look older. The real change was his eyes. Neither of them knew why, though they hypothesized that it had to do with the excess chakra running through his system for 2 entire years. But his usual blue eyes now bore slitted pupils. That and his whisker marks no longer faded back to thin lines after he achieved complete control over Two Tails' cloak. In addition to that, his hair was longer, appearing almost as Minato's from certain angles. Now if he could just get the kid to cooperate with him on his Ichi-Icha, then he could get some quality material. Not that it would ever happen, but maybe he could get some when Naruto finally found some girl he liked. He personally refused to count the pink-haired monstrosity as a girl. She was some kind of rage demon masquerading as a member of the female species. Truly a horror to behold, and she didn't even have any tits to speak of. Oi, pervy sage, what's that look for? Oh, nothing Naruto, nothing at all. You were thinking something perverted, weren't you? Naruto growled accusingly. Admit it. You can't even go 5 minutes without thinking about girls. I should lob you into a women's hot spring again, see if that finally cures you of your illness. Jiraiya coughed and sweat dropped. No need to try and kill the old man for good. I haven't groped Tsunade in over 3 years. You. No. I can't die quite yet. Knew it, perv. Says the boy who gets chased around by the local kunoichi every time we go into a village. You might be more like your mother than I ever imagined, but you aren't completely immune to it. I saw the way you looked at that girl back in the last village. You were honestly thinking about asking her out, weren't you? Naruto's head whipped to the side. Shut up, he blushed, scratching at the back of his head. She said she liked my eyes. Most people get freaked out by them these days. Poor Naruto. Most civilians are put off, but half of the shinobi who see them assume you have a dojutsu. Not the worst thing for them to think. It puts them off the idea of attacking you. And that makes things easier for both of us. Jiraiya stood and walked to the fire, stooping down to bank it for the night. Now shut your trap and get some sleep. We get up early tomorrow and head east. Naruto gave him the finger and slipped backwards off the log he was sitting on. He landed on top of his sleeping bag with an oomph of expelled air. He lay there staring up at the night sky as Jiraiya finished prepping the fire for the long night and went to his own sleeping bag. 1 week later, Naruto sighed as he looked out over the crystal blue ocean. Pity. If we were a bit further south we could stop by and see Tazuna and his family. I wonder if Inari took over his father's business by now. He'd be the same age now that I was when I was there last. Jiraiya huffed as he finished speaking with one of the local fishermen. Yeah, but then we'd have to worry about the last remnants of the Kiri loyalists. They're still being hunted down by the new Mizukage. I don't want us getting caught up in anything big a month before we head back to the village. Fine. Anyway, where is this agent of yours? He pointed down the shore to a larger docking area that bordered the shoreside village. That right there is where we meet. Usually she sends me reports through a secondary chain of contacts set up throughout the Land of Fire, but seeing how I've been on the road for a good 3 years, I've missed 6 separate reports from her. I'm eager to see what she's learned. Every 6 months. Naruto frowned. What is she doing if she only sends you updates every 6 months? Villages have been razed and rebuilt in less time. Ah, Jiraiya grinned. That's the thing about her. She doesn't just log shipping lanes anymore. She actually went over there a year or so back. The journey to the other continent takes a minimum of a week by water. And that's with special ships aided with ninjutsu. A normal fishing vessel would take over a month to travel there and another month back. So she has about 3 months over on that side at a time. Naruto nodded, looking back towards the dock. What time is the meeting? It's scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp at the local bar. We'll be going in on time, but you need to disguise yourself again. Remember that just walking around town is usually fine. Bars are always places where information gathers. And Naruto finished the sentence for him. Where others go to gather information, whether it is being given freely or not. Yes. And as much as it was amusing to watch the girls fawn over you in the last 3 villages, this is one of my best agents and she doesn't need any attention being drawn to her through our actions. So keep your head down. Alright, old man. Gimme a second to get my henge in place. Naruto made a single hand seal and in a plume of smoke there was a blonde-haired girl in his place, remarkable attractive, but wearing modest clothing that didn't draw attention to itself. This being the infiltration version of Naruto's not-so-infamous sexy jutsu. When he was completely done, she got into character. A serious, pouty expression became the default instead of the roguish grin Naruto usually wore these days. She turned and gave a mock salute to Jiraiya. Oi, ready to go, uncle? Or is it sensei this time? Jiraiya started walking towards the village. You'll be my student until it is more convenient to reveal your identity. Keep up the usual attitude. She'll like you with that. Okay, but what is she like, based of people we've met recently? Appearance-wise. She has black hair, maybe late 20s to early 30s. Looks-wise, rather like that Kuretsuchi girl from Iwa. At least that's how she keeps her hair, not much in the way of tits, but with a rather nice rear end. Quite muscular. The biggest thing to tell her by is her arm is mechanical. Mechanical. Like metal? Naruto scrunched her face up. Never heard of anything like that except in the Land of Iron. Don't the samurai have stuff like that? Oh, she keeps it hidden and is quite vain about it. I wouldn't talk about it if I were you. She'd probably try to kill you for it. Naruto groaned and started following him. Ya no, I'd like an explanation, old man. I mean, every one of the agents we meet. Seems like a vain person who would kill you for mentioning it. That's not. Nikiko Village. The old man with the wandering eye who threw a kunai at me every time he thought I was staring at it. That was, or Insuna with that girl with the huge rack and who was so self-conscious about her squeaky voice that she made us communicate in writing the entire time. And when I asked why she was being so weird, she tried to chop my balls off with that claw gauntlet of hers. Naruto raised a finger, or even your agent in that Kumo village that thought she was such hot stuff that when I mentioned that she wasn't exactly in the peak of her youth anymore, she literally tried to turn me inside out. What about her? As they walked, Jiraiya let out a sigh. Well, at least they all came around once they learned about who you were. Of course. Naruto rolled her bright blue eyes. As soon as you dropped the Namikaze bomb, they all turned into the nicest people you could imagine. But I don't care about who my dad was. I mean, I love the fact that he was my dad, but I don't want others to respect me because of who my dad was. I've told you that before. True, and that's not even the point I was trying to make. We're going to meet someone weird and somewhat insane, aren't we? I'll take that as a yes. She's really a great person once you get to know her. Naruto deadpanned so hard that somewhere in Konoha a certain wood-style user sneezed before going back to practicing his stare in a small pocket mirror. You're pathetic. Jiraiya's shoulders slumped as they entered the edge of the small village. Conversation dropped off as they made their way down the street, drawing looks from nearly everyone, despite the fact that both were dressed as civilians. This might have been because Jiraiya was easily head and shoulders above most in height, and his hair was almost unique to the elemental nations. Not to mention the fact that he had a massive scroll on his back, which might have detracted from the civilian dress. However, people stared more at the beautiful blonde girl by his side though, the eyes of the men not failing to notice her curves even under her modest clothing. Nor the fact that she walked with a grace that was beyond beautiful. Inside said blonde's head she was at once proud of himself for deceiving some who were obviously ninja. Why at least 3 of the men who were leering at him wore ninja headbands. And at the same time he was disappointed that no one, ever, saw through his disguise. Honestly, there was no challenge anymore. Even Jiraiya, with all the time they'd trained together, could only guess who the real him was in a shadow clone battle. Honestly, people should have been able to see through a simple henge, regardless of how well put together. But, as always, it seemed that the guys were too busy trying to measure her 3 sizes and the women, too busy being jealous. Naruto thought of all the people he'd fooled with a simple henge and his superb acting skills. Literally he could count the number of people who could see through his henge on one hand. And 2 had the Sharingan, 2 had the Byakugan, and the last was an Inuzuka. All 5 required some assistance to see through his henge. She gave a great sigh, emphasized by the dramatic movement of her breasts, which was shortly accompanied by the mass dripping and iron tang of several bloody noses in the area. Which building is the bar? She asked, getting annoyed. This one. Jiraiya turned on his heel and they made a swift right into a smallish building on the north side of the village. They entered through the open door and into a relatively well-lit room with some 15 or so people in it, all men. This immediately alerted both of them to the absence of Jiraiya's agent as well as to the fact that Naruto in the guise of a female was now, without a doubt, the center of attention. Jiraiya, realizing that the situation was less than the best, still decided to continue with it. He turned his gaze to the left, scanning each booth in turn and located the one where he was supposed to meet his agent. In her place was a young man, about 30 or so. He had long straight brown hair and dark eyes. His skin was pale, but not naturally. His pasty complexion looked to be from some emotion like fear or sorrow. Jiraiya noticed the distinct lack of any weapons or even a headband. Not that any of his agents wore headbands when they came to meet him. These meetings were meant to be discreet after all. An Iwa nin, for instance, would not normally deign to even speak to a Konoha nin. So they tended to leave anything that marked them as ninja at home. Naruto nudged Jiraiya. I don't feel anything off about him, but he smells, I don't know, desperate almost. I'll take it from here. Keep silent until it's clear he's not some spy sent in her place to get info on us. Got it. They both strode into the bar, ignoring the blatant stares of at least half the room, and seated themselves at the booth where the man sat. For a moment he seemed not to notice them, then with a start, he looked up. Oh. You must be. Naruto made a line across her throat with one thumb and frowned dangerously. The man stopped just short of saying what would probably have been, Jiraiya of the Sannin, and gulped nervously. Jiraiya smiled at Naruto for salvaging the situation at least a little bit. Then he glanced back at the guy, who was sweating at that point. Who are you? 20 minutes later they were outside the bar and quite a ways away from the village. Naruto still hadn't become himself yet, keeping up the pretenses of being a girl. While Jiraiya was trying to get the man, now identified as Sir Armin, to calm down. It took a while, but eventually the older man succeeded in getting Armin to breathe properly. Now, Jiraiya said, his voice somewhat strained, that we've established that you know who I am and that you are coming in place of my agent, please explain yourself. Armin, who was only slightly less pale than he had been, nodded. I am terribly sorry for my reaction, but I was sure you wouldn't come. Recent events in my homeland have been horrible and I have little faith in foreigners. I'm truly sorry. He gave a deep bow to Jiraiya but asked timidly, but I was also under the impression that you were to come alone. His eyes darted to the blonde worriedly. Jiraiya waved it off. This is my student and he will be the heir to all my operations. If I die in the near future he will take up my duties as spymaster. Armin blinked. You do mean, she, right? Naruto let the henge run out of chakra and closed her eyes as the illusion dispelled in an explosion of smoke. When it cleared there was a very male boy there, with his arms crossed and his eyebrow raised in question. Yet another guy who can't see through a basic henge. Armin looked amazed for a moment then recovered. I am sorry, but I was not aware you were under a henge. My wife did not tell me much of her abilities as she was always busy. I was under the impression that she was the only one who could do that. Wife? Jiraiya blinked in shock. You're telling me that Hakana married you? Yes, allow me to explain please. I am Sir Armin, former tactician and advisor to the Emperor. I am not born of these lands, as I am from the capital. You probably do not know any of this, which is why I am here and must tell you everything. My wife tasked me with this job in the case that she died. She's dead. Jiraiya closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself a moment of sorrow before getting back to business. Tell me everything from the beginning. Very well. Armin sat down on a log in the clearing where they had hidden themselves and began. To start off with, I met your agent, Hakana, a year and a half ago. She at first told me that she was from a foreign land in the far south and was in need of information. I had just recently been dismissed from my position as an advisor to the Emperor and had nothing else to do. She offered me money and I wasn't in any position to refuse, so I helped her get settled on the Empire's far western coast. It wasn't too long and we became friends. I, for my part, was still mourning the loss of my rank and position while she, I thought, was a refugee of some kind. We grew close very quickly and to cut a very long and a bit sappy story short, she eventually told me her secret. She wasn't a refugee as I assumed, nor even from my home continent. She was an elite warrior from another land sent here to gather intel on possible threats. Jiraiya glanced at Naruto, who shrugged. What was it to them? They couldn't blame someone for falling in love. Armin didn't even notice their movement and continued. I was shocked, of course. I didn't even know she could fight at the time. So I asked her for proof and she used that same ability that you used to become a woman. I was astounded. I assumed that she possessed an imperial arm, one of 48 powerful artifacts created by the first emperor. But she said that she was born with the power and that she could do any number of amazing things with it. She then explained that she loved me, but that she had a duty to perform. She said that this land is currently in a cold war of sorts. No one dares openly declare war, yet it isn't peace. I understood what she meant by this. She wasn't there to cause trouble, but instead to make sure that anything from my land didn't start off the next great war here. He swallowed hard, so I decided to help her in that regard. Hakana started to branch out and create a network of small-time informants and spies on the coast. It was very successful, or at least I thought it was. She was always so efficient it scared me sometimes. But we continued. That was when things took a turn for the worse. Hakana heard from one of her informants that there was revolution against the capital of the empire. I'm sure you know Jiraiya. That Hakana was very opinionated and would stop at nothing to help others. I had already told her of what happened to me in the capital and she understood that the entire capital is corrupt to its core. So she contacted the revolution and, in particular, a group known as Nitrade. Nitrade? Naruto asked. A group of specialized warriors and assassins of great power and skill. Their duty is to kill corrupt individuals in the capital and protect those few just leaders that are left. They're the front line of the revolution and are regularly hunted by the capital's most powerful men, and, he added almost as an afterthought, women. He shivered at some unknown thought and continued. She contacted Nitrate and asked if there was any way she could help further the goals of the revolution without being discovered. They sent back that there was a way. They asked her to go to the capital and meet with a member of Nitrate and exchange information. Then she would help set up a network of spies and informants in the lands surrounding the capital itself. Things went very smoothly for 2 months after that, but Armin looked to the ground suddenly, his jaw clenching. But then we were betrayed. One of her contacts on the coast was actually an agent of the capital and had been working his way onto Hikana's trust the entire time. And about the time that my wife had 50 people working in and around the capital, he struck. Jiraiya began to feel sick at his stomach and Naruto was pale. The next day my wife's head was on our doorstep and there was a note. On the door, it said, "Those who oppose the empire oppose the emperor himself, and by the law of the land, those who oppose the emperor will be sentenced to death." It was a warning to everyone who had dared try to stop the corruption that we didn't have the power to stop them at all. I left as quickly as I could and, under my wife's instructions, I came here the following month. And here you are. So the capital destroyed the spy ring she set up there? Yes. Naruto groaned loudly. And only a month left and we have to go back to Konoha. Damn. I so want to go over there and kick ass. Now, he gritted his teeth. This emperor sounds like a scumbag. I ought to rip his head off. No. You are mistaken, Armin shouted. The emperor is a nice boy, kind to a fault and ignorant of everything he does. The man who is to blame is his chief advisor, or I should say, only advisor. His name is Honest and he is the most evil man I have ever met. He has made himself into the emperor's only friend and confidant. At Naruto and Jiraiya's surprised looks he explained further. You must understand that my homeland operates under an absolute monarchy and the emperor is the last of his family. The royal family's advisors have always had immense power. But our current emperor is barely 13 and knows nothing about how to rule a nation. His late father knew that he would leave his son as a young boy on the throne and gave him an entire cabinet of advisors, 20 in all, to help him govern until he was ready to do it alone. But Honest has killed, discredited, or banished all of them in the emperor's name. Jiraiya let out a groan of his own. So you have a figurehead as your emperor and the one behind the scenes has manipulated him into thinking that everything he does is for the good of the people. Unfortunately, yes. That's just great. Not only did I lose one of my best agents, our neighboring continent is ruled by a figurehead. And this figurehead is controlled by an advisor who seems to be slowly rotting your country from the inside out. Am I correct at assuming that life is not easy or pleasant in your homeland? That is true. Armin admitted. Many of the outlying villages and towns are filled with families who are slowly starving to death for lack of food. The capital taxes everyone in extremes and when they do not have the money to pay them, the enforcers take possessions. Then food or water. Then anything that you own. And Honest recently convinced His Majesty to bring back a kind of slavery. It's terrible because of how excited he was about it. I think the emperor's education has been stunted and twisted so much that he would think having someone executed the best thing in the world. Jiraiya's expression twitched, struggling not to show his anger. I only have one question then. Yes, Lord Jiraiya? Will you help me? Us. That depends. He closed his eyes. Do your people know of us? The elemental nations? Of course. Armin nodded. They have known about another continent to the west for years. However, the emperor before the current one was content with our holdings and did not wish to venture into new territory. He was a peaceful emperor. But Honest wants the entire continent under his control and will probably succeed in conquering the few free nations left in 3 years or so. Naruto interrupted. That's pretty fast. 3 years to take over a whole continent? I mean, here that would be impossible. All the villages are relatively equal in strength. Except for Suna and Kiri, which are weakened right now. How could your capital take over a whole continent in that short a time? To be blunt, the people of your continent are very powerful. My wife told me that even a low-ranking soldier from one of your villages could most likely take on a captain in our army. I think that she said that even our generals would have a hard time against true Jonin, though I don't know what that name is exactly. Naruto pointed to himself. A Jonin refers to a specific rank out of 4. Genin are the weakest and newest to the military. Shunin are more skilled and experienced. Jonin are the elites, and Kage are the leaders of the individual villages. I'm only a Genin, but I have abilities that easily stack against strong Jonin. He nudged Jiraiya. My sensei here is at Kage level right now. He could level whole villages with a single move, but then again so could I. Jiraiya shook his head. Naruto, shut it. He turned to Armin. Go on. Well, he sighed. Unlike here, the capital has almost all the strong warriors already in its service. For example, the capital's 2 great generals could defeat an entire army single-handedly and come out uninjured. In fact, that has already happened. Currently the Ice General, as she is called, is in the far north conquering the tribals that banded together there. And the Lightning General is still in the capital acting as a deterrent to the rebels and Nitrade. And there isn't anyone outside the capital that stands a chance against these 2 great generals? Not really. Those 2 are demons, devils in the skin of men. I once thought that the Lightning General, known as Budo, was a just man. Armin expelled an angry breath. But I was wrong. He sees anything that opposes the Emperor as trash that must be destroyed. Even though he knows the Emperor is an ignorant child being controlled by the Prime Minister, he can control lightning, and his physical strength and endurance is legendary. Tell me, Jiraiya leaned forward. Will the capital turn its gaze on the elemental nations once it has taken control over its own lands? I wouldn't doubt it for a moment. Although I don't know if they could defeat you, I think that Prime Minister Honest would do that, without question. Jiraiya swore loudly and stood. He bit his thumb and smeared blood on his palm. A split second later he slammed it into the ground. Naruto and Armin watched as a large toad appeared in a plume of smoke. Armin was gaping like a fish out of water, either at the 6-foot-tall toad, or the manner in which it had been summoned. Perhaps both. Yo, Jiraiya-sama, how's it going? Listen, no time to talk. Something has just come up that is extremely important. I need you to go to Konoha immediately and tell the Hokage that we need an extension of at least 2 months on Naruto's training trip, details to follow. Okay, the large toad shrugged. Fine with me. Anything else? Yes. Send a messenger toad to Otsu village and contact my agent there. Tell him to come to this village immediately and take over Hikana's duties. The toad saluted. As you command, Master Jiraiya. Then in a plume of smoke, he disappeared. Jiraiya paid it no mind and turned to Armin and Naruto. Okay, this is what we will do. You, Naruto, and I will go to your homeland and find out exactly what the situation is. That shouldn't take more than 3 months to accomplish. Then we will decide what is to be done about this. We absolutely cannot allow your people to set off another great war here, and if push comes to shove, we will help you deal with this corrupt minister ourselves. Really? Armin looked ecstatic. You would actually come to our land and help yourselves? That's more than I could have ever dreamed. The toad sage raised a hand. Wait. Armin quieted and listened. We are only going there to appraise the situation and deal with small issues as we meet them. Once we have decided on a course of action, we will call for reinforcements to remedy the situation. While my student and I are very strong, we aren't going to take on an entire country by ourselves. That would be idiotic and far too slow. We would send a message back to bring a few teams of our elite shinobi whose talents were just right for the task. Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Yeah, it's a pity I don't know how to use Hiroshin, otherwise we really would only need 1 person. What is Hiroshin? Jiraiya waved him off. Not right now. We have a relatively limited amount of time to work with. I have been in war before, and 3 months is hardly any time at all in the scheme of things. And time flies even faster when you are working to prevent war. We will leave today by the ship that Hikana used to go back and forth between your land and ours. I don't have much skill with water-style jutsu, but I have enough to get us there in just over a week. Naruto can help with the wind as well to speed our arrival. We leave today? Naruto asked hesitantly. Just like that? Yes, now let's get going. Naruto grinned. Granny Tsunade is going to so pissed. But, oh well, I want to see this place. In only a week I'll be kicking ass. With that, they left. 2 days later Armin watched, still in some amazement, as Jiraiya funneled a stream of wind into their ship's sails. He'd been doing this for hours, and before that Naruto did the same. The blonde had kept it going for 2 entire days. without taking a break other than to eat. It was astounding, and his sheer control over wind, it was incredible. He could have easily held the title of Great Wind General to match Death or Budo. What scared him was Jiraiya's straight-faced comment about this being, quote, only a small piece of what he could do. That was almost scary. His wife had shown him some powerful techniques, but nothing that compared to punting a medium-sized ship along at speed for 2 days straight. But he didn't voice these thoughts of wonderment to Naruto or his master. He felt that doing so might lower himself in their eyes. He already appeared to be desperate and he didn't like feeling such. As weak as he was and as little influence as he'd had recently, he liked to be able to do things at his leisure. Back when he was an advisor to the Emperor, he was able to do what he wanted when he wanted and no one would question it. He didn't abuse the power like others often did, but he still enjoyed the privilege. Being with Hakana had made him feel important again, and in more than one way. Both in that he had a beautiful woman doting on him, and that he was affecting world events again. Now that she was gone though, he felt powerless, especially with such powerful men as these two. Armin sighed as Jiraiya let the winds die down. Oh, sheesh. That really takes it out of me. I'm mainly a fire user, so wind is opposed to my power. Not as bad as water, but still hard. Anyway, go wake up Naruto. He's probably rested enough to take over for now. Wait. Can I ask a few questions about your chakra, was it? Sure. I'm actually surprised that you haven't already asked. Jiraiya leaned back against the rail of the ship and crossed his arms. What did you want to know? Armin scratched his chin. How is it that you can do all this without Tegu? In my land we use artifacts known as Tegu to produce some of the same effects. For instance, there is a pair of heavily armored gauntlets which give the user complete control of lightning. But neither of you have artifacts of any kind, and neither did my wife. I'm not usually one to pry, but I am confused. Let me put it this way then. Imagine if these, Tegu, as you call them, imagine if we had a genetic ability to use similar abilities passed down from generation to generation. My agent, you wife, was skilled with water style. She could pull water out of thin air with only a small amount of effort. She never really told me. Of course not. Jiraiya shook his head. She may have told you some of her abilities and she may very well have loved you, but she wouldn't endanger her entire home continent just so you could be well informed. Someone might have captured you and tortured the information out of you. I understand that. I just have a hard time believing that your wife would be so cautious? Yes, that's exactly it. Jiraiya sighed. Your homeland is obviously more lax than ours. Your wife was a member of the hidden village of Konoha. The village hidden in the leaves. She was, above all else, a loyal ninja. And in OU land, which has been warring off and on since before anyone can even remember, secrecy, discretion, loyalty. These traits are taught and valued above all else. She was in what she probably considered hostile territory every moment of the day. He closed his eyes. It may seem out of the ordinary to you, but a more devoted kunoichi would have killed you rather than create a loose end during her mission. Armin took a step back and paled. That's one of many things that make ninja more deadly than normal men and women. We are willing to do what others would gag at the thought of. It isn't that we are monsters, it is merely that we do what must be done. Jiraiya cracked one eye, his expression becoming very serious. Besides, you can't fight monsters without, in some way, becoming one. Armin swallowed and practically fled the deck, almost sprinting into the cabin and descending below to the middle level of the ship. There he let himself catch his breath. He was pale, very pale. To think that his wife might have murdered him because she loved him, because he made her lose momentum or an advantage in completing her mission. To think that these two men could be the very same way. Did he really want to recruit them? What was he thinking? These two men were immensely powerful, and, no, wait. They are just doing what is right for their home. Just like what I am doing, fuck. I have to get myself together. I can't just shy away because they are willing to go to drastic measures to get the job done. It's like he said, it takes fire to fight fire sometimes. You can't fight something that has nothing to lose without putting everything you have on the line. To destroy the capital, we are going to have to resort to underhanded measures, just like Hakana said. He straightened, his mind resolved, and walked over to the living quarters to wake Naruto. Naruto mumbled sleepily as he stood, very confused, in the middle of a. He looked around. To all appearances he was standing on a white-capped plateau. He could see nothing but blue sky and white clouds around him, or was it snow? He couldn't tell, and it was very strange. Why was he here? Wasn't he supposed to be? Ah, I'm dreaming. Naruto blinked rapidly and looked up into the sky. It was pale blue with streamers of cloud. It was beautiful. Well, this is way better than most of my dreams. Guess I'll enjoy it. Looking around again, Naruto became aware of a feeling. Like something was out of place. Or, no, that wasn't the right way to describe it at all. It was less a feeling of something missing, and more the sensation of something being there that wasn't supposed to be. It was uncomfortable and growing more so by the second. Naruto shook his head as a pressure. A cold pressure squeezed his mind. His thoughts. Ow. What the hell? Dreams aren't supposed to hurt. What the hell? He fell back, his rear landing in cold white powder. Snow. Why does it feel wet? What the fuck is happening to me? Naruto cursed loudly as the pressure on his thoughts became painful, icy needles burrowing into his temples. He winced and put his hands to his head, groaning in pain and collapsing backwards to lie flat on his back. Ow, he moaned as the needles, drills, continued to turn his brain to mush. He screwed his eyes shut from the excruciating pain and gritted his teeth. And then, it stopped. Naruto felt the pain abruptly vanish and the uncomfortable feeling of pressure changed into a cool, pleasant sensation in the back of his mind. It was comparable to the feeling of a snowflake melting on your skin. Chill but at the same time, gentle. He let out a long breath and lay still. He didn't know what had just happened or why. And he really didn't want to move again in case it restarted the drilling. Instead, he settled for letting his muscles uncoil, letting himself slowly relax. Where am I? Naruto opened his eyes. He sat up quickly, his ears registering a voice, feminine and clear, like a strident bell. Loud and demanding, yet soft in its undertone. It almost seemed to echo in his mind after the initial sound had faded. He turned around. Naruto blinked and blushed pink. He found himself staring at, possibly the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen in his short life. A young woman, looking to be maybe 20 years of age. She was tall with the fairest skin he'd ever glimpsed and hair the color of sapphire. His eyes traveled upward from her long-toned legs to strong thighs and wide hips. His blush deepened as he noted the neatly tripped patch of light blue between her legs. A versus shape that would have caused Jiraiya to die outright of blood loss. Her waist was curved delightfully in a perfect hourglass figure, yet the muscles were tight and absent of unnecessary fat. Naruto tried and failed to skip over her breasts, which were only a size away from Tsunade, their color so. Gulp, he moved on, up the slopes of her breasts to her nipples, 2 medium pink circles, and to her graceful neck, around which rested her only adornment, a black collar-like band inset with a small black cross. Just below that, nestled above her breasts, was a simple black design like a tattoo. Then his eyes took in her face, and he would have sworn that, had he ever desired to redo his sexy jutsu, he need look no further. Creamy skin that held no small embarrassed blush and rosy lips that were still full and kissable, round features and eyes that perfectly matched his own. Long eyelashes that were themselves blue. Her hair fell in 3 parts that curved inward over her eyes. Naruto found himself incapable of speech as his face flamed red. 3 thoughts were warring in his mind. And nearly a minute passed before one fought through to the head. She is beautiful. Nothing else occupied his mind, and he was quite unable to say anything. He was stunned, shocked, paralyzed by the beauty before him. As much as he had done his best to survive his sensei's teachings, he still couldn't help but memorize every detail of this woman's perfect figure. She too seemed paralyzed, and her own cheeks were darkening even as they sat there. She was less than 10 feet from him. He could smell her. A scent like melted sweets. He couldn't help it. His heightened sense of smell caused him to close his eyes in pleasure as he inhaled. He didn't know why this felt so real, so vivid. But he couldn't bring himself to move from that spot. He simply couldn't break the spell that he was under. Armin turned into the room where the blonde ninja had gone to sleep. He glanced across the room to the inset cubby where he was snoozing. Armin walked across to him, taking note that he slept curled up like a fox kit. Had he been a woman, he was sure he'd be hugging the life out of him, but no. He was a man, and he was already somewhat scared of this boy. Regardless of how harmless he looked right then. He closed his eyes and spoke out loud. Hey! Wake up! Master Jiraiya is ready for you to take over. Naruto didn't so much as twitch. Armin shifted and repeated himself a bit louder, but again, nothing happened. Well, I guess he really tired himself out. I'll go back and ask Jiraiya about whether or not to let him rest more. 2 days really did seem like too long. Death took in the boy's features. He was handsome with golden blonde hair, which was quite unruly. His skin was a deep tan and she could tell that he was powerfully built, yet also slim. She let her eyes move upward, taking in his strange dress. A burnt orange and black jacket, appearing to be lightly armored. It was open in the front to show chiseled muscles covered by a black mesh shirt. At the same time he wore black pants and armored combat sandals. She noted the white of scars that littered his body, testament to great injuries. Their eyes met. His were a deep turbulent blue, his pupils were black slits that seemed to flicker as a candle's flame. They were stunning and she felt something in them, like a connection. A tie to those eyes or, perhaps a similarity. The rest of his face was just as unique. His round face was handsome. Very handsome. His expression, which was currently trapped between confused and enchanted, was at once seductive and vulpine, and cute. The 3 jagged black marks on either side of his cheeks only made this more pronounced. Death blinked as she saw his mouth open, exposing long canines. He breathed in and his eyes drifted closed. An expression of sultry enjoyment lingered there even as they opened again. Those blue tiger-like eyes settled on hers with a kind of intensity that she'd never experienced before. And then she heard his voice. Who are you? It was deep and purring, as though he was speaking in the rich tribal tongues of the West. Yet she understood him perfectly. Though his accent was strong and foreign. It reminded her of nothing so much as a fox, yet she couldn't say why. Who are you? And what are you doing here? He trailed off, his eyes dropping lower for a second before rising to her face again. And, why are you naked? She blushed a deep scarlet, not knowing how to deal with this situation, and not understanding why she was so flustered. She didn't know this man, she didn't even know where this was. In fact, she was supposed to be sleeping at that moment, so, this had to be a dream. Yes, that was it. This was just a dream. So who was he? Why was this young man so vivid? And what had inspired this amazing image in the first place? She was in the middle of a soon-to-be-over war in the north. There had been no one who even looked like this young man. Especially not with his unique features, not with those eyes. Not with that. Death breathed in, catching a strong scent. She blushed harder. She didn't understand why, but her stomach twisted hotly and she shivered at the animalistic quality his scent possessed. Death realized abruptly that she had, seemingly in an instant, become at least physically intoxicated by his mere presence. He felt. And there it was. Hovering in the background like a low hum. Power. This boy was dripping raw power. It saturated the air around him, settling in like dense fog. Her senses had been so saturated by it that it numbed her perception. It was incredible, amazing that such an endless ocean of energy seemed to flow from him. She curled her fingers and bit her lip, her eyes fluttering closed as she allowed it to wash over her. She had no earthly idea what was going on, but she couldn't be bothered to care. If this was a dream, it was both the strangest and most pleasant one she'd ever had. Who are you? Her eyes snapped open as she felt a warm breath on her face and the tickle of hair in her face. He was right there, his blush receding ever so slightly as a look that perfectly mixed confusion and embarrassment marred his face. Or not. She couldn't say that the expression of puzzlement didn't make him seem even more attractive. Once again his question fell on her deaf ears without her mind being able to register the correct response. Who was she? Was she not the great general of the empire? The ice queen of the emperor's military? Why did she feel like a shy maiden right now? Armin came back out on deck as Jiraiya took a deep draught from a canteen on his belt. The Sannin gave him an odd look. Where's that lazy student of mine? Don't tell me he went back to sleep. No, I let him sleep a bit more since I couldn't wake him. I figured he was more tired out from his duties manipulating the wind than we knew. Nah. You just have to be really insistent. Go smack him upside the head with something and he'll wake up. Got to do it hard though. The kid's head is hard enough to knock through stone, or so I've heard from certain people. I guess. Armin turned back into the ship to wake Naruto for good this time. Naruto leaned in close to her, feeling a bit embarrassed to be so close to such a beautiful and very naked girl. But her eyes had closed and she had an almost blissful look that made his stomach do flips. What was that look for? "Who are you?" he repeated gently, not wanting to startle her. Her eyes flicked open and her cheeks and neck flushed an even deeper shade of red. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she paused. Then after a moment she asked, "Who are you?" He tilted his head to the side. "I already asked 3 times, but I'm Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. Who are you?" "Death, of the Pardas tribe, General of the Empire." Her blush deepened, if it were possible, and she leaned forward. "What are you?" "How? I'm dreaming, aren't I?" "I don't know about you." Naruto hesitated as her nose was nearly touching his, but he didn't stop her from continuing. His skin was tingling with a cool sensation that was hard to ignore. The feeling was far too pleasant, raising bumps on his arms. "I thought I was dreaming too, He trailed off for a moment, regaining the courage to speak. "Are you real?" She was still, matching him, their faces barely an inch apart. "Yes. I am real, but what are you?" "I'm dang cliffhanger." "What? But don't be too angry. I'm actually posting the next chapter right after this. Remember to review anyway? 2 No Rest for the Wicked? And here is the new chapter as promised. Please don't be too mad at me for my long absence." Chapter 2. No Rest for the Wicked. Naruto woke with a start and a painful yelp as something large and weighty smacked him in the head. He rolled out of bed swinging. His arm and the kunai it held barely missed Armin's throat by inches. The man went stumbling backwards as Naruto let loose a savage growl and aimed to kill him. Only to stop as he realized he wasn't under attack and this wasn't another one of his sensei's tests. He sheathed his weapon and stood, glaring balefully at Armin. The guy had just interrupted perhaps the most intense dream he'd ever had in his life. He's been there on a snowy plateau with nothing but a naked girl. But not just any girl. The girl who was perhaps the most beautiful example of the female species he'd ever laid eyes on. Not only that but Naruto groaned in frustration. She said she was real. It felt real. Hell, he could even remember her smell. Perfectly. And this bastard woke him up. He wasn't pissed, but he was aggravated. He wanted nothing more than to go back to sleep and see if he could reconnect with wherever that was. See if he couldn't keep talking to her. He couldn't explain it, but he wanted to hear her voice again. He wanted to taste her scent again, and he wasn't at all opposed to looking at such a stunning creature when she happened to be naked. "I'm sorry, Naruto. I didn't mean to do it so hard. It slipped out of my hand." Naruto was dragged back out of his thoughts by Armin, who had shakily stood and seemed quite put out by the fact that Naruto almost killed him. The blonde was about to smack him upside the head for being an ass, when he remembered something. Death, of the Pardas tribe, General of the Empire. He suddenly smiled. That was it. She was real. She said she was a general in the Empire. And he only knew of one empire at the moment and that was exactly where he was heading. Her name was Death, of the Pardas tribe. A general, huh? Well, I'll just have to track her down when we come ashore. I wonder if Armin knows the name, huh? I'll ask another time. I'm still annoyed that he woke me up just now. Naruto gave the man a glare and, assuming that he woken to resume propelling the ship along, he moved out of the living quarters. General Death, leader of the Empire's greatest army, woke in her field tent to the sound of laughing soldiers. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling, just looking up and watching the roof of the tent sway. Her tongue darted out to state her lips. The scent was gone, but she still remembered it. She could imagine the musky aroma filling her nose and sending pleasurable shivers up her spine. He'd disappeared. That handsome young man with the amazing blue eyes and golden hair had vanished like smoke on the breeze just as he was about to answer her. She was pissed, royally pissed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd blushed or the last time something had stirred her embarrassment like that. Did she even remember the last time? It made her furious. No, not that it happened. The feeling itself was exhilarating. She liked it, wanted more of it, needed to feel those emotions again, and most of all she wanted to know what that boy was. The pure, raw power he had been almost dripping. She'd never met anyone who exuded such power, such unimaginable strength. It had been like a lake, no, an ocean of power. She'd felt small beside it, so very small. She desired to be in that presence again, to feel that tide of energy wash over her, drown her senses in that hot current. He said his name was Naruto Uzumaki. A most unusual name to be sure. She wasn't at all certain that she'd heard either, ever. And she'd met thousands of people since she became part of the capital's military. She didn't know where he came from. Probably a distant country, but why had she not heard of him? Someone who could impart such a feeling through a mere dream had to be famous in his homeland at least. Death shifted, naked under the thick blankets of her bed. A second later she sat up, her icy blue eyes taking in her tent. She was the strongest, and she had always been the strongest. Now, she'd encountered something that could swallow her power whole, and she wanted it. Wanted him. It was instinctual, the desire to take what she wanted. She had always wanted a man, yet she'd never met a single one other than Budo who could match her power. And she would sooner commit ritual suicide than be with that man. But him? That innocent, yet undeniably feral look. The cast of his features, seeming ever the more foreign as she recalled them. The black flicker of the pupil set in those sapphire eyes. He was handsome, amazingly so, and in just the way she liked. She didn't even know she liked that kind of man until she remembered that unruly blonde hair and fox-like, bordering on feline, curiosity. It didn't seem possible, but she liked him, wanted him. Like a lioness who seeks out the strongest mate, she wanted him, and this little war in the north. It had become a hassle. A waste of time that could be much better spent elsewhere. Death slipped out of bed and was dressed in less than a minute, snatching her rapier and clipping it to her belt as she exited her tent. Once outside she raised her voice so that the entire camp could hear her. "Pack it up. We end this today, or I'll end you. Tomorrow." 4 days later the breeze was slow and cool as the ship's captain guided it into dock. Being that Naruto, Jiraiya, and Armin were the only passengers, the departure was quick and silent. The captain of the vessel scarcely waved goodbye to them before they were gone and moving into the small seaside town. Jiraiya and Armin stood fairly close together, discussing their initial plans and where to go from here. Naruto walked off to the side a bit, his eyes resting on them every few seconds before returning to his thoughts. He absently let his feet take him in the same direction as the two older men while he lost true sight of the street in front of him. Naruto took in a deep breath and imagined a sweetness on his tongue that wasn't there. It made no sense. Everywhere he felt the familiar sense of that girl from his dream. That girl who was very much real. He'd overheard Armin and his godfather talking about the higher-ups in the capital, and Death was most certainly one of them, though Armin had admitted to not knowing her personally. Supposedly she was in the far north on a campaign to conquer the northern tribals, who had banded together into one nation. He didn't know what to think of that, and even if he did, he couldn't really care. There was just something about her. Ever since that dream during the trip, he couldn't stop thinking about her. It was like an itch in the back of his mind that absolutely refused to be banished. At some points it was almost maddening. He'd feel a light breeze and his skin would abruptly go bumpy with the memory of her presence. Or he would hear a soft brushing noise and his imagination would conjure images of her thighs rubbing together as she crawled towards him. That alone was enough to make him stumble in the street, his cheeks going pink. It was ridiculous that he was unable to get her out of his head. It was just a dream. But, at the same time, it wasn't. That much was obvious. Normal dreams didn't allow you to communicate with real-life people from the other side of an ocean, and certainly not if you'd never even seen them before. Like, how was his mind supposed to conjure up an accurate image of someone you've never seen before? Still, that was beside the point. It didn't seem important at the moment that it had happened, or why it happened, only that he couldn't force the image of her out of his mind for 5 freaking minutes. Thoughts of her were like an invasive species of insect. Almost impossible to purge. Even at that moment, meandering down the street, he could perfectly recall what she looked like, down to every little detail. It was insane how easy it was. And worst of all, or maybe best of all, he couldn't rightly tell which it was. He wanted to see her again. Badly. The desire to see her again was like a constant background hum, and when his thoughts focused on her, as they did now, he had this warm pleasurable feeling in his chest that was very hard to ignore. This feeling, even if he'd been as dense as he used to be, it couldn't have been mistaken. This was like how he used to feel about Sakura, except 1,000 times stronger. It didn't help that after their real meeting he dreamed of her, really dreamed of her afterwards. It was enough to make him turn beet red. Her voice, soft and clear, yet strong and vibrant. He could imagine her whispering seductively in his ear. Naruto-kun. Naruto fondly imagined that he might walk straight into the side into a building so that he might knock himself out, and hopefully land back wherever that girl happened to be at the moment. How he wished he could just see her aga. Hey brat. Watch where you're going. Naruto blinked and stumbled back, rubbing his temple. He looked up and found himself staring into the intricate steel chest plate of a soldier. His eyes traveled upward and his eyes widened. The man was huge, 8 feet tall at least. He had grim yellow eyes and a square chin that could be used as a stone hammer, and he looked pissed. You watch it, piss ant, or I'll show you the back of my hand. Who died and made you my superior? Naruto easily reached out with his thoughts and brushed the man's. PTFH. This guy is weaker than Konohamaru. Who is he calling piss ant? Taking another step back, Naruto reasserted his balance and gave the man a scolding look. Sorry for bumping into you, but you don't have to be an asshole about it, ya know. He rubbed his forehead and turned to follow Jiraiya, who was still deep in conversation with Armin. Where the hell do you think you're going, pipsqueak? No one insults me. I'm the captain of the guard here. Naruto paused briefly, glancing around. A few people in the street had noticed the small confrontation, but most seemed to be in an evasive mindset. They skirted the two of them. Naruto considered telling the guy off but came to the conclusion that it was asking for trouble. Minds as well be diplomatic, even with this ass. He bowed his head ever so slightly to him. Sorry again, but I wasn't breaking any law and I did apologize. You think that's enough? The man bellowed, now fully getting the attention of everyone on the street and turning Jiraiya and Armin around. You think you can slander me in public? I'll tell you something, you insignificant insect. I am in charge around here and you need to be taught a lesson. Jaw-dropping, Naruto stared slack-jawed at him for a second before his eyebrows drew down. Okay, whoever you are. Newsflash. I just bumped into you by accident. If you want to fight about it, I'll knock you into the middle of next year. I don't give a damn if you're a general. You need someone to pull that stick out that you have shoved up your ass. People in the street stopped and stared, apparently amazed by this declaration. Surprise and no small fear etched in their faces. Naruto didn't notice them anymore. He was thoroughly pissed at this guy, and not just because of what the jerk was trying to pull, but because his sixth sense was telling him that this guy needed a lesson in humility. And after years of working with the best spy in the elemental nations, he learned to trust his instincts. Some people just needed to get their asses handed to them before they could be decent to one another. Then you're challenging me to a duel? Dueling isn't allowed, you midget. Now unless you want me to drag your scrawny rear to the prison, you better kneel in the dirt and tell me just how sorry you are. Wham! Bones snapped like dry twigs as Naruto sent a fist into the man's face, breaking his jaw like kindling and sending his unconscious body into a wall on the other side of the street. Naruto dropped back to the street and spat on the ground. He growled low in his throat and turned away then, not bothering to lecture someone in manners who wasn't awake to hear him. Instead he strode back after Jiraiya and Armin, cursing under his breath about people who were so rude that the only way to show them the error of their ways was to knock them through a wall. He hated stubborn assholes like that. You there, halt. Naruto stopped in his tracks and turned around. Fuck me, not 10 minutes off the boat and the goddess of luck is already trying to screw me over. I swear there better be some hell of a reward for all the shit I get these days. He groaned as the 6 men and women in armor, all of which looked strikingly similar to the guy he just downed, approached him at a jog, their swords drawn. You, state your name and the reason why you attacked the captain. He was being a dickhead. That's why. He tried to arrest me just because I bumped into him. Naruto turned. Ask him when he wakes up. I'm done here. Halt. You are not to move. In the name of the Emperor, submit to the law and come with us. Then you may file a report on what happened and how you managed to knock out a captain with a single punch. Naruto looked into the eyes of the woman who was speaking and considered how to handle this. She seemed less of a bitch than her superior officer, but he did not have time for this shit. And he sure wasn't in the mood for it right now. There was also the small detail where he was from another continent, and that would almost certainly make things more complicated than they were worth. How about no, I don't have time for this. I told you the truth, and if you don't trust my word, that's too bad for you. He turned and walked away saying, and if you try to stop me, I'll knock all of you out. 2. Die then. Naruto effortlessly turned to the side as a sword blew past his face. His eyes met those of a young snarling man, who received a fist to the jaw and a chop to the side of the neck, knocking him out and backwards to land in a heap 20 feet away. Naruto felt as if he was swatting flies. What were these guys? They advertised every strike like this as some weird combat version of charades. It was a new kind of pathetic above and beyond how slow they were. And he wasn't even using chakra. And the 5 other soldiers seemed to realize just how easy he'd dispatched the young man. Naruto capitalized on this. This is only slightly harder than breathing, you know. If you want to wake up in a few hours with a splitting headache and nothing to show for it, go ahead and attack me. They looked at each other as if silently asking something. Naruto waited as they huddled together for a moment, then broke apart. The woman in charge nodded to a bearded man who looked to be the oldest of the group. Naruto's gaze shifted to him, taking in his huge frame and brutish appearance. He was almost as tall as the late captain. In one hand he held a large intricate hammer. It looked like it was made of some kind of ebony-hued metal. It didn't feel quite right. The wielder of the black hammer stepped forward and swung the weapon around in slow loops. His eyes burning into Naruto. I am Maklo, the strongest man on the western coast. Try not to die, blonde man. Naruto tilted his head to the side as he tensed, then stepped to the side as Maklo disappeared from where he'd been standing in a burst of speed. The hammer was thrust through the space Naruto's shoulder had occupied a moment before. He's about low Chunin level, impressive in comparison to that pathetic captain. But still way too slow to have a chance against me. You're very quick, boy. You have no idea. Naruto shot back as the hammer rocketed sideways but missed its target a second time. 10 of you couldn't land a hit on me. Maklo shook his head and stepped to the side, twisting his body and using the momentum to redirect his hammer to Naruto's kneecap. He continued to speak slowly the entire time. You misunderstand, boy. I am Maklo, wielder of Hypa Kanedzuchi, and I will crush you. Naruto casually dodged his next swing, and the next. He realized to some extent that it would be a bad idea to get hit by the black hammer, but Maklo was making things difficult for him. You see, Naruto had a rather unique problem. He was massively overpowered. Just not in the same way as others. The problem, as it were, was that he could kill any bandit without using so much as a shred of chakra. And that punch he used on the captain had been at half physical power. On the other side of the coin, he could use chakra to vastly increase his fighting potential, but because of the sheer quantity of chakra he possessed, he couldn't control it very well at low levels. Thus he was like a power outlet. He was either off or on. It was only when he drew on large amount of his power that he gained any measure of fine control over himself. But that amount of power would turn this guard and all of his friends into red smears on the ground, effortlessly. But he couldn't go up against him using no chakra because he was just barely strong enough to dodge his strikes without chakra. This man was slower than a Chunin but only slightly stronger than a Genin. His speed was about the same as Sasuke's during the mission to Wave Country. Much faster than a civilian, but nothing compared to his speed and power. The very thing was, he could stomp most Genin without using any chakra, so how did he take this guy out without killing him outright? Any chakra-laced punch would likely cause his organs to rupture and turn him into a ragdoll. Naruto was snapped out of his thoughts by a shout and a lunge. He pumped chakra into his body as he'd been using absolutely none before and disappeared in a blur of speed. Maklo's hammer crashed into the ground with the force of a minor dragon-type jutsu, leaving a huge crater. The guardsman's eyes were wide and darting back and forth. He hadn't been able to stop his momentum when the blonde kid suddenly vanished from in front of him. I hope you're stronger than I think you are. Maklo's face turned to the side just in time to see the fist crash into him. His hammer flew from his grip as a shock rippled through his body and he was blasted backwards by the impact of the strike. He coughed up blood as his back hit the stone wall of a nearby building. His mind reeled and pain exploded through his whole right side. He thought that every rib on the whole side might have been shattered. And as he drew in a breath he could feel a sucking sensation coming from inside his chest. At the same time he couldn't feel his arm at all, and he was losing feeling in his face. Gods above, how strong is he? Maklo raised on hand to wipe at the blood now pouring from his mouth. I was mistaken. He is by far the stronger. I allowed myself to be overconfident now that I wield a Tigu. Oot, this boy only hit me once. Now, do you understand? The blonde moved forward. I didn't want to fight. I was minding my own business when I ran into your captain. And now you attack me for defending myself. What kind of guards are you? He growled. Now, I want you to know that I put as little power into that punch as I can. But if you try to attack me again, I'll hit you hard enough to kill you outright. I said I didn't have time for this, and now I have even less. He turned away and started walking. I'll be going now. Maklo couldn't have moved if he'd wanted to, but the rest of the guards surged forward. The blonde turned on his heel, his eyes blazing. He took in a deep breath and brought his hands together in a harsh clap. And from the collision, a massive gust of wind exploded outward, sending the guards tumbling head over heels down the street. Even the civilians were thrown like cards in a strong breeze, barely avoiding injury as they were tossed away. Damn idiots. I'm not in a good mood anymore. So fuck off before I blow a few houses away. Naruto whirled around and angrily stomped back to where Jiraiya and Armin were waiting. His sensei looked aggrieved while Amrin was pale. But then again, the guy was usually pale these days. He paid no mind to them and walked right past, continuing on his way out of the village before something ticked him off even more. The two men glanced down the street to where the men and women, guard and civilian alike, were just picking themselves up. Then back to where Naruto was walking ahead of them. Armin was the first to speak. Lord Jiraiya? Is there something wrong with him? He seems to have a very short fuse and it's becoming shorter by the day. I've noticed that too, but I don't know what to say about it. Naruto usually confides in me, so if I had to guess, he's just agitated about this whole war thing. I simply hope that he doesn't do anything like that once we reach the capital. That would be a disaster. Armin shook his head quickly and tugged at Jiraiya's sleeve. Let us leave before the guards collect themselves and decide to arrest us as well. Jiraiya nodded and they followed after Naruto quickly, or at least as quickly as Armin could move, which wasn't at all fast in comparison. I wonder what has gotten into you, Naruto. You usually aren't this short-tempered even when you're restless. I know we were on a ship for more than a week with nothing to do but fill the sails, but this is a bit much. 30 minutes later, Jiraiya and Armin caught up with Naruto in a small clearing. The blonde boy had his arms crossed and his eyes closed as he rested against a tree. They both approached, but Armin stopped at the look on Naruto's face. The expression was the very purest definition of confusion that either had ever seen. Or, well, that Armin had seen. Jiraiya still remembered how Lord Third used to be with the old Team 7, but that was another story. Both men paused and Jiraiya's eyebrow raised as a slight flush that suddenly colored Naruto's cheeks. The blonde shifted slightly in the sand and realized, somewhat belatedly, that Naruto was asleep. Huh? He just leaned against a tree and decided to take a nap? I thought he... Armin nudged him and asked loudly. What's he doing now? Didn't he just beat two men to a bloody pulp because we're in a hurry? Why is he sleeping? No idea, but the kid has been acting weird ever since I sent you to wake him up the other day. When I asked him to proofread the latest chapter in my novel, he just gave me this odd look and didn't answer. Jiraiya frowned dangerously. It's not just smut. Never mind. Jiraiya shook his head and walked over to his snoozing student. Blue on blue, sapphire to lapis lazuli, ocean to sky. They stared at each other for nearly 10 minutes before either of them was able to move or speak past the lumps in their throats. Naruto, swallowing hard, managed a husky, "Hi, again." The woman's face across from him suddenly broke into a wide smile, her white teeth showing through. Indeed. Neither spoke for several seconds, but eventually Naruto licked his lips and glanced away from her. I still don't know what happened, but I haven't seen you the last few times I slept. His gaze flicked back to her semi-nude form, his heart pounding in his own ears. He just couldn't keep his eyes off her. The moment he dozed off and found himself here, he knew. This was the same as the first. This was another meeting. But what did he say? Your name was Naruto Uzumaki. Yeah. And yours was Esdeath. Pardas, right? It is. She nodded, her cheeks steadily darkening. Naruto wasn't a fool anymore not to notice and blushed as well, his eyes dropping momentarily to her perfect breasts. He mentally cursed his godfather for turning him into a perv, while at the same time thanking him for it. He coughed. You're real. Blue eyes sharpened. So are you, I think. Her blush deepened, either from embarrassment or arousal. He couldn't tell which. It would be quite unsettling for me to be falling for a delusion. She stood and stalked closer to him, seeming to ignore the fact that she was almost completely naked. And when she was only a few feet from him, she sat down, bringing herself to his level again. Tell me something, boy from my dream. Do you feel the same irrational desire to be with me as I do for you? Naruto blinked. Wah. She leaned in closer, her voice sinking into his mind like hot water from a hot spring. Do you? Naruto was jarred awake by a large hand pushing him over. He started and flung his arms out to catch his balance. He fell sideways and rolled to his feet, already preparing for an incoming attack. Then he saw Jiraiya grinning slightly. Having a good dream, kid? Naruto blinked. Now Naruto Uzumaki had been pissed at his sensei many times in the last 3 years. When his sensei had thrown his off the edge of a cliff into a nearly endless ravine just to unlock his chakra, he'd been pissed. He'd been angry when his teacher decided to take all of his money to go and spend time at an infamous brothel for a week. He was furious when Jiraiya took an entire month to just teach him how to give what he called a massage, but what he personally thought was only an extremely advanced seduction technique. Not that he was anything more than grateful that he knew the technique now. But that wasn't the point. Right now he was livid. Jiraiya had just interrupted his dream, his meeting with the stunning girl who he simply couldn't stop thinking about. He'd bulldozed right in and cut it off right as it was getting interesting. She'd been leaning in to ask, to say something, and bang. He was right back here with that grinning idiot who had the nerve to consider himself a Sannin. Naruto honestly didn't know what was wrong with him. Jiraiya had interrupted him when he was flirting with girls before. In fact, he seemed to be getting revenge for all the times he'd been interrupted himself. But right now, he didn't know why he was so otherworldly pissed. He wanted to rip the old man a new one and then shove the old one up the new one so far that he was talking crap about himself. Pissed did not even begin to describe the feeling of knowing that he might have to wait another week, or even longer, to see that girl. He'd been waiting and waiting to see her in a dream again. Every single night he didn't see her in that strange meeting place. He dreamed of her in other ways. He couldn't get her out of his head, and he knew with almost every fiber of his being that she was the one for him. And Jiraiya woke him up. Fucking old man woke him up? Old man, you have some serious explaining to do. Jiraiya and Armin jumped at the cold, furious, demonic voice. It was filled with so much rage that it boiled over and spilled from his skin. Red mist seemed to be leaking from every pore. You were sleeping, and we have places to be. Jiraiya stammered out, a bit shocked that Naruto was actually radiating the Kyuubi's chakra out like that, just because he was woken up. What had the kid so pissed all of a sudden? You have 3 seconds to promise me that you will never wake me up without a good reason again, before I tear your balls off and feed them to you. Jiraiya watched in horror as the Biju cloak solidified around Naruto. The blazing blue eyes bled crimson in an instant, followed by his tiny claws morphing into talons. Behind him 3 tails of solid bubbling chakra tore free of the cloak. Oh shit. 1. Armin had flattened himself against a nearby tree and looked like he was about to pass out from the sheer killing intent. Jiraiya had gone very pale, very pale. He didn't know what he'd done wrong. Had the kid been having some kind of paradise dream or something? Why was he calling on the Kyuubi's chakra because of a dream? And why in Kami's name was he threatening to rip his nuts off? 2. Jiraiya fell to the ground in a profound prostration. Please spare my balls, Gaki. I'll never wake you up again on my word. Naruto's eyes regarded him with a silent condemnation that more than rivaled anything Tsunade had ever leveled on him. Jiraiya had a strong urge to faint from terror. He'd never seen this side of the kid before. He'd never actually been terrified of him. Not like this. It was like Naruto was threatening to murder him for waking him up. Abruptly Naruto's violent aura dissipated and he straightened. Armin collapsed in a dead faint just as Jiraiya looked up. Just as he did so, Naruto's foot met his chin and sent him into the tree Armin had just been flattened against. He let out a cry that sounded oddly like a croak and collapsed on top of the unconscious man. Naruto growled. You damn well better keep that promise, old man, or on the graves of my parents I will make sure you never can get laid in your life. His eyes faded back to blue and he glanced at Armin's body under Jiraiya's. You're carrying him. Jiraiya, the third member of the legendary Sannin, gulped as Naruto turned on his heel and started to walk away. What the hell just happened? The tent, formerly belonging to General S. Death Pardas, along with a 200-foot circle of land around it, was the frozen wasteland. However, at its center, the nearly nude form of the young woman rested on a bed of ice for several moments with one pale arm covering her eyes. Then she sat up, her cold blue orbs taking in the ice around her. She was pissed. Royally pissed. She'd never known she could be this angry until her long-awaited dream meeting with that blonde-haired young man was cut short again. Her cheeks reddened as she thought of him, even as her eyebrows drew together in fury at the interruption. Someone needed to die. 1 week later, Jiraiya watched his student and godson with a wary eye. The blonde's foul temper had lasted for the last few days. He seemed to be extraordinarily irritated. Even now Naruto was muttering under his breath about something. The older shinobi thought that he might be able to make out what it was if he used chakra to heighten his hearing, but he wasn't sure he wanted to hear what his godson was thinking. The last 7 days had been like a sort of ritual. Everyone woke up at their accustomed times, save for Naruto, who slept in late one of those nights. Then over breakfast they talked about the politics of this country and how everything worked. It was mostly information about various officials, what they did, and how they were important. After that they would get on the road, continuing their way towards the imperial capital. Armin and he would speak more on the road about the state of the capital and what he knew of the revolution. Likewise, he would tell Armin a little about the elemental nations, though nothing about each individual village. It was strange though. Whenever Armin mentioned the capital's generals, the woman known as Esdeath in particular, Naruto would perk up. Jiraiya hadn't seen anything overly suspicious, but he swore that once he saw Naruto giving Armin a look that, had the man caught it, he would have died instantly. If he recalled correctly, Armin had been recounting some unpleasant rumors about the general. Maybe Naruto was still pissed at Armin about something though. With how erratic he was behaving, it was hard to tell. Jiraiya honestly didn't know what to think about Naruto's temper. It seemed to have magically appeared shortly after they met Armin. Sure, he'd had a temper before and he was always quick to anger, but he'd never been this much of a hair trigger. And the last time he'd blown up on him had been when he's made him learn how to give expert massages so he could seduce women for him. Still, that hadn't been anywhere near a fraction of the anger that had been directed at him a week ago. I wonder what's going on inside the kid's head. Maybe he was daydreaming about that Sakura girl or something, but I thought he got over her a long time ago. He shook his head and kept walking, only to pause in his steps for a brief moment. A high-pitched noise alerted him to something behind him. He glanced back to see a small wagon behind them being pulled by 2 small horses. There were 2 men on top of it, one holding the reins. Jiraiya dismissed them as one man waved to him in greetings. He waved back and turned to continue on his way, still deep in thought. Meanwhile, Naruto grumbled to himself. He'd had another very distracting dream the night before and, as seemed to be constant, he couldn't stop thinking about his girl. He didn't know when he started thinking about the strange girl like that. She was a general of the empire who, if Armin was to be believed, commanded thousands of men. He was hesitant to believe him though, with all the awful things he said about her. He claimed she was a homicidal psychopath who took great pleasure in torturing her enemies to death. Naruto's hand clenched. She wasn't like that. He could feel such a strong connection to her. Like his soul was tied to hers. He blushed every time he thought about her moving closer to him, crawling naked across the ground. Her scent teased him at the same time. No, she couldn't be like that. He refused to believe that she was some cold-hearted murderess. She would be his as soon as he could find her. Then he'd prove Armin how stupid he was to believe such rumors. Esdeath was so perfect. Sure, he could see the ruthlessness in her eyes, in the cast of her features. But he couldn't exactly say he was any different with his enemies. It wasn't something he hid these days. He was no longer that pure-minded little boy who tried to save everyone no matter how evil they were. Besides, he wouldn't find himself attracted to her if she was evil, some horrible twisted person. He couldn't have so utterly fallen for her if she was as Armin described. His mind wouldn't reach out to her when he slept if she were some monster. He could feel that she was good, that she was his. Naruto closed his eyes as a warm ball churned in his chest, making the smallest of smiles twitch over his lips. He couldn't wait to dream of her again, to speak with her uninterrupted across whatever distance separated them, or even better, to see her in the flesh, to touch those pink lips. He was sure they would be so soft, against his own. Crack. Naruto was jerked out of his daydream as the ground under him exploded under him. It shattered upwards in an explosion of dirt and stone. 15 feet behind him, Jiraiya and Armin, who noticed what was happening a few seconds before it did, felt a sudden shiver go up their spines. Both of them had the same frightening flashback from the other day. Even further behind them, the two wagon drivers went pale from the double scare of the oppressive aura, and the massive monster rising from the ground 30 feet from them. They shouted in terror and abandoned the wagon, running out of range. The horses had the same idea and turned the vehicle around, trotting away as quickly as they could. And a ways behind the wagon, a young man saw the rising figure of a danger east and grinned. Back with the, now extremely annoyed, blonde. Naruto was doing his best not to get eaten. He dodged upwards, but the strange, insect-like beast followed him at a startling pace. His eyes twitched in anger and he pumped enough chakra into his right leg to knock over a structure roughly the size of the Hokage's tower. And kicked. Everyone watched as the blonde boy lashed out with one foot and connected with the snout of the massive creature. Abruptly, as if a 30-ton hammer had hit it, the monster's head snapped down, blood exploding out from every gap in its plate armor. The force of the kick having turned its insides to mush. Then the blonde's hands came together and a blast of what looked like white blades crashed into it. The effect was tremendous and bloody. The monster was rent limb from limb, pulverized, shredded, all but obliterated. Noxious blood splattered everywhere, raining down and covering the ground around in red. Chunks rained down as well, falling with slick squelching sounds. Wide-eyed shock from all but one of the observers heralded the blonde landing amid the eviscerated remains of the beast. Blood drenched him from his waist down and splattered upwards in patches from there. Naruto glared at them briefly before he looked back to the mess that he'd made. It covered one whole part of the road. Grr, now I'm soaked. He muttered and started forming hand seals at a rapid rate, finally ending them and closing his eyes. Everyone watched as a large orb of water formed over his head, seeming to be taken from the very air around him. Then it dropped onto him from above. He then pulled off his shirt and pants with everyone watching and turned to walk into the woods on the left side. Jiraiya and Armin stood frozen. The non-shinobi gulped, his head turning to the older man. He just did that. Kid never did understand discretion when he was angry. Both jumped as a shout came from behind them. That was awesome. They turned around slowly as a young man jogged up to them. Hey, that was unbelievable. How did he do that? Is he with you too? Jiraiya would normally have said something along the lines of course he is. After all, he is my student and I taught him everything he knows. But under the circumstances, he didn't even think about such a retort. In fact, his mind was completely blank besides. Who are you, kid? Oh, sorry. My name is Tatsumi. I'm heading to the capital. Are you guys going there too? Armin and Jiraiya shared a glance. This kid seemed a bit too excited and they couldn't be sure of what to say after that display. Naruto was supposed to be keeping undercover to an extent. Sure, it wasn't an absolute mandate of their self-assigned mission. Their goal was to find out the state of the capital and decide what, if anything, should be done about it. However, Naruto had just used a chakra-based technique that would automatically be labeled as an imperial arms by anyone who knew of their existence. This kid might not know, but, well, things seemed to be getting a bit out of control. They certainly were having difficulties controlling Naruto. Speaking of which, hey old man, I'm cleaned up. Let's keep going. We'll be in the capital by the end of tomorrow if we keep up this pace. That's awesome. We're heading in the same direction. Naruto cast his gaze over to the newcomer. Who are you? My name is Tatsumi. I'm from a village in the southwest and I'm going to the capital to make it big. I bet you're doing the same thing, right? You're probably some elite warrior looking to join the army. The kid's excitement could only be compared to Naruto's own 2 years hence. But Naruto had a serious cool down after that, which led to his new somewhat calmer attitude. Still, he could still be overexcited, but this kid, he was almost Naruto's age and he was still like this? Jiraiya sighed as Naruto crossed his arms. Not really. I'm already part of the military, just not this one. Tatsumi's expression seemed to crack, only to reform into an even more excited one. Oh, wait, what other military? That's for me to know and you to probably never find out, Naruto said bluntly. Jiraiya resisted the urge to face palm. Did his godson really just say that? It made his out to be part of some special operations unit like the Anbu. This kid would be over all three of them like bandits on the trail of a merchant caravan. Then Naruto shrugged. It's not something we're allowed to talk about even if we wanted to tell you, which we don't so. Oh, Tatsumi breathed in a low whisper. I get it, real under the table stuff. I understand, he grinned and jumped ahead of them. Hope I see you in the capital when you're done with your mission, maybe we could spar. Naruto gave a lazy thumbs up and turned on his heel. His eyes settled on Jiraiya and Armin. A slight smile hovered about his lips. Now, pervy sage. Thank Kami he stopped calling me old man. He only does that when he's ticked off at me, so maybe he's calming down. Next time warn me when the ground underneath my feet is about to explode in my face. I might have a better sense of smell than you, but you have better hearing. Naruto frowned. Can we get going now? Before we find any more copies of my 12-year-old self? Right, Jiraiya nodded. That would be a great idea. Armin coughed lightly. Am I the only one who thinks we should do something about the enormous mess in the road? Both shinobi gave him a blank stare that said three things. First, why should they care? Second, why should he care? And third, weren't they supposed to be moving quickly? Of course, pardon me for thinking that. Armin's sweat dropped at their perfectly blank expressions. Exactly how were they able to do that? Was it some manner of short-range telepathy? Regardless of that, his was a bit freaky and made his unnaturally opposed to doing anything that might piss them off. Not that he wasn't already scared shitless of doing something to make either one of them angry at him. After all, if the boy was willing to rip his balls off for waking him up, what would either of them do for some more serious incident? And that wasn't counting the fact that he hadn't given them a fraction of the information they needed to understand the political landscape of the capital. There simply wasn't enough time to give them that much information. Also, he realized again and again that he kept thinking that they were here to help him. They weren't. Both of them were here on the behalf of their own nation, deciding just how much of a threat Honest was and how long they could afford to ignore the capital and the empire. Then if they decided that there wasn't anything back home that was more important, then they would consider helping him. It was exactly how his wife had been. She had to know all the risks before she flung herself into something. It was just the way she'd been raised. And those two were no different. Hell, he couldn't even be sure that they wouldn't leave if they thought that the problem was too big for them. Sure, they had hearts. They felt the pain of others. He'd felt and seen that in them. But both of them were also coldly practical people who calculated gain against loss with an experienced eye. If they knew they couldn't do something, they wouldn't. Armin realized then that he'd been left behind. Hey, wait for me. The click of heels and the stiffening of sentries heralded the coming of a general. The swish of a sheathed blade at the hip, the rubbing of crisp fabric, and the subtle clicking of knuckles as fists were opened and closed. General Esdeath had arrived. The Ice Queen of the North, as she was just now being called for the first time, strode down the main hall of the capital's mighty imperial palace. Her sapphire blue hair was behind her, rippling in a wave as she passed row after row of guards, who did nothing to stop her. They knew why as well as she. She was strong, the second strongest general in the capital and therefore recognized as the second strongest being alive, besides the emperor of course, but he was still a child so no one counted him unless they were at court. The fact was that there were dozens of formalities that were required, simply to enter the main throne room of the palace. But Esdeath bypassed them all without so much as a glance. And the guards who usually attended to their duty with firm hands and sharp sword, didn't do more than stiffen and keep their eyes forward. It only took one time for those in the palace to get the message. Esdeath might have been vicious, but no one could say she wasn't efficient. The woman, who had every right to be feared, continued down the hall at a brisk pace. No one realized, and even the keenest observer would have been hard-pressed to notice that, she was paying absolutely no attention to her surroundings, whatsoever. A child with a wooden stake could have killed her if a child with such courage existed in the world. For General Esdeath's mind is not currently in the land of the living. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Much like a certain young man had been quite completely distracted. Earlier, she couldn't seem to focus on the mundane tasks of life for more than a few minutes. Esdeath sighed inwardly. She wondered, she wished, but most of all she was tired. She thought nothing could be more pleasing than to get to her personal chambers and crawl into bed and sleep. Provided of course that she could meet her. Could she call him her lover? No, she couldn't, yet. Well, if she counted the other dreams she was having every time she closed her eyes for more than 20 minutes, then yes, she could easily say they were lovers. She hoped fervently that the real him, when they finally met, would be up to the task of equaling her imagined version of him. A small smile quirked one side of her lips. In bed at least. I hope he's good with his hands. A cold blush might have stained her cheeks at the thought of that, but she could control herself at least that much. Never mind that she defiantly thought she would lose it when she met him in person. Oh, how much had that meeting crossed her mind? How many times had she imagined meeting him? She thought she'd planned and rehearsed every single possible outcome. Okay, so maybe she hadn't strategized for what she would do if he was sitting on the Emperor's throne when she arrived, but she decided if it happened, she wouldn't be complaining. Indeed, she wouldn't complain if she met him in battle and they were on opposite sides. Since she'd abandoned the capital before so much as laying a finger on her man, with the intent to harm. A month ago she would have asked herself where this sudden disloyalty to the Empire had come from. A month ago she might have wondered why she was willing to toss away everything she had earned for a boy she'd only seen in a dream, for less than 10 minutes. She was past asking such stupid questions at this point. Every time she closed her eyes she saw some part of her fantasies. Naruto, his name was like a burning torch in the back of her mind that wouldn't go out. She couldn't stop thinking about him. It was like nothing she'd ever experienced before. She remembered again the pleasure she'd felt when he recalled her name, the syllables of her name on his lips, the foreign way he'd pronounced it. Even the hesitation in remembering her clan, she couldn't find fault with any of it, and if he'd mispronounced her first name, she would have been highly tempted to change it. Death inwardly paused at that. Maybe she was getting a bit too. Well, what was she saying? Was she willing to do anything for this boy she hadn't even shaken hands with? Hell yes. Death's cold exterior broke somewhat as a true smile, seeming predatory to those around her, formed on her lips. Her eyes acquired the quality of a huntress seeking her prey and her fingers twitched at the hilt of her blade. As soon as she was done with this meeting, she wasn't going to sleep. She was going out to find him so she could. Death blushed crimson within the confines of her own mind, so Naruto could do things to her. A few short minutes later the doors to the Imperial throne room opened before her and she walked in, every inch the general. The eyes of every man in the room turned to her, some in shock, while others only paled slightly. None of them, save their oblivious emperor, could quite restrain the urge to shudder. Death was smiling, and the expression was somehow wrong on her exquisite features. The assembled captains to the Imperial army and the varied administrative officials all stood quite still as Death paced across the room without a sliver of hesitation, only stopping when she reached the first step up to the throne. Then she made an elegant bow, her head tipped downward ever so slightly. She might have served the emperor, but she still had an inherent dislike of bowing to anyone. Ah, General Death, I didn't expect you for weeks, possibly a month or more. The emperor's voice rang out across the hall, high-pitched and surprised. Death waited several seconds, as was the norm to allow the emperor to be absolutely finished speaking, before she made her reply. It was taking too long. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and for once she wasn't even to blame. Everyone besides the emperor had felt a chill running up their backs. They personally hadn't expected to see her back in months. How long had it taken her to destroy the supposedly unbeatable Northern Alliance? This ending beat even her own impossible estimate by a full 14 days, and that wasn't counting her return. The North must have been conquered more than a week prior to this if she was here now. To those assembled it seemed, to put it bluntly, that she did the impossible on a whim now. Even Honest was somewhat frightened of the possibilities. Sure, she had been loyal to a fault thus far, but if something ever happened before that he would have to use his secret weapon on her. There would be no other choice. No assassin in the world would take out General Death, at least, none that he had ever heard of in the last 1,000 years. Excellent, was the Emperor's reply. This is far ahead of schedule and you have returned alone? I suppose you left your army to settle things in return? It is just so, my Emperor. Great, he smiled that innocent smile of his, the polar opposite of her own, and flicked his eyes to Honest. See that she is paid accordingly to her efforts. The original reward, plus 20% for ending it in half the time that my best advisor estimated. Death closed her eyes. That is not necessary. The room suddenly stilled. The Emperor blinked in surprise. You don't want the gold? No, I have no interest in it. If you feel the need to reward me, send the money to my troops upon their return. However, her head rose, eyes opening to meet the Emperor's. I have a personal favor to ask instead. Of course. What is it you desire? Death didn't even hesitate. It has come to my attention that there is a certain man I must find. I would like an unspecified amount of time to look for him, immediately. Now this shocked everyone, and more than a few prayed quietly for the poor man's soul. Behind the Emperor's throne, Honest stepped forward and whispered in his ear. The Emperor's eyes widened and his mouth formed that kind of O that meant he'd realized something rather important. The young ruler turned his eyes back to Death, face somewhere between innocent resolve and apology. I'm sorry, General Death, but I can't grant that at this time. You see, there is a terrorist organization which has killed dozens of important figures since you left. It is imperative they are eliminated quickly. I'm afraid I don't know how long it would take for you to find this man you speak of, so I cannot grant that request. At Death's expression, the Emperor, and everyone else in the room, and several people who were nearby at the time in completely different realms, winced. That is unfortunate. Death's voice was filled with a kind of sweetness. It permeated her tone like cold permeates the ground in the far north. Her eyes locked, not onto the Emperor, but onto Honest. The man immediately began to have second thoughts and leaned in to whisper to the Emperor again, but backed off as the Emperor leaned forward as well. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but this must be done for the good of the Empire. Is there anything else you might want instead? I'm still willing to grant your first request as soon as you destroy the terrorists. Death frowned. There are a few things, though not as important to me at the moment. And they are? She seemed to deliberate for a moment. I would like to visit the vault where the Imperial arms are kept and take one of my choice. In addition to that, if I must destroy these rebels first, then I would like a year off as the reward for doing so. The Emperor blinked again. For what purpose would you want another Imperial arms, which you couldn't use, and a year off? Is this because of the man you mentioned? All who were present were witness to something that had been deemed impossible to achieve. Death blushed scarlet. Yes. Honest could not contain his curiosity. And what relation is this man to you? He will be my husband. 7 figures stood around a large rectangular table. They whispered among themselves for several minutes, their tones, those of a conspirator. Each radiated an aura of power and efficiency. They were assassins. They were killers. They were on the hunt, and before the week was out, their plans would be executed and their targets eliminated. Everyone, they turned to regard their leader. Tomorrow we strike at midnight. And here is the end to the second chapter. Now, as is customary for any good reader of fanfiction, a review is appreciated and to a certain extent expected. And remember, just like in the last chapter of Sealing Twilight that I posted, I want honest reviews. Not just you guys and girls telling me how great my story is. If you think there is something wrong, something that needs change, or even a verbal tick that I've forgotten to use, please mention it. Every little bit helps. So again, please review, and thank Vexicus905 for all the ideas he's provided to keep this story going. 3A somewhat less than chance encounter. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to fanfiction. Tonight we have a little treat. For the first time in a while the esteemed author has been able to post an update. And what an update it is! The third chapter of Incarnation, now, without further ado, the reader responses. SHONENJUMP Guy. Yes, Naruto is being a bit of an ass in the last chapter, however I have been trying to get across to readers just how unnaturally strong the connection between him and Death already is. And yes, I made Naruto less of a pussy than he is in canon. In this story, if someone pisses him off, he will not hesitate to fuck them up. Doomquir. The connection between Naruto and Death will be fully explained much later on. Don't hold your breath cause it's a major plot point. I didn't just decide to use the dream sequence route just because it's cool. Desuobake. Do you really even have to ask? 2 different people. If you don't like my jutsu, fine. Dislike my jutsu all you want. I think they sound alright. But if you're so retentive that you can't read my story simply because of the jutsu names, well, that's your problem. And no, I am not going to translate every jutsu into Japanese when some of them may only be used once in the whole story. Paradoxity. Hey man, don't feel bad. A lot of guys like romance more than their masculinity should strictly allow. I'm the same way. I'm at the point where I don't even want to read a story if there isn't any romance in it. Action is great, but if that's all you want, watch a movie. That way you can at least see the explosions. Guessed. It's hit and miss. No, I won't make her submissive, in bed at least. All the time. But Naruto and Esdeath are on even terms. He has to have his time on top too, ya know. Finally, an available username. Yes, Naruto can be a bit ruthless in this story. But that is partially because I have Jiraiya actually teach him like he damn well should have been taught in canon. And not just jutsu and fighting skills. But also teaching Naruto how the world works and getting rid of Naruto naivete. Also, I fucking love your username. Now, on to the story. I don't own any part of Naruto or Akame ga Kill. Chapter 3. A somewhat less than chance encounter. There were many things in the world that had shocked Naruto in his life. The first and foremost had been that ramen existed, the food of the gods, and then less than a week later that, for some reason, not everyone loved the food of the gods as much as he did. That and many other things paled into insignificance now. Why? The capital is huge. He simply could not believe that something could be so massive as to cover everything in sight, and he meant everything. Even the distant mountain in the distance was actually the imperial palace. Armin and Jiraiya glanced at each other. The Sannin was dumbstruck. Armin just sighed. I thought I told the both of you that the capital was massive. Naruto whirled around. Massive? One of the hidden villages is massive. This place is as big as 10 of them in one place. He turned back around, gazing at the titanic spires of marble that rose high into the sky in the distance. This city is hell. The Kyuubi might need a whole day to destroy this place. It's colossal. Armin swallowed hard at that and glanced towards Jiraiya. Don't ask. He didn't, but turned back to the blonde. Hey, it might be night time, but there are still guards about. I'm not sought after, but I'm still not strictly allowed to be here. And you both have said repeatedly that you shouldn't draw attention to yourselves. Naruto suddenly became very quiet as if responding to his warning. His body was very still. Armin sighed. Good, then let's find an inn for the night. I am very sore from all this traveling. Jiraiya. The Sannin's head snapped to Naruto's, whose own gaze had been drawn to the side. Naruto never called him by his name unless he was very serious about something. It was almost a watchword for danger or readiness. What is it, Naruto? Blood. I smell lots of blood. And, rot, his nose scrunched up in disgust. It was faint, coming from the east, but as soon as I heightened my sense of smell it became overpowering. It's like one of Orochimaru's labs, only the scent of decay is stronger. It smells like a prison and a torture room mixed together. Jiraiya frowned and turned to Armin. Know what it might be? I don't. He was also pale, but from the description, not the scent. He couldn't tell what they were talking about. He smelled nothing out of the ordinary. Certainly nothing rotten, nor the iron tang of fresh blood. I don't smell anything wrong, and I don't know why you would. This is a residential district, not an area with a prison or anything like that. In fact, the area we're in isn't far from the homes of the moderately wealthy. Naruto scowled. I feel something bad. He jumped over to Armin and bit his thumb. Hold out your hand. What? Just do it. Armin nodded and gave Naruto his hand, watching as the boy drew on his skin using his fresh blood as ink. It disgusted him, but he didn't move, already knowing this was a skill shinobi like them possessed. Naruto finished a few moments later and spoke under his breath. Fuin. The blood shimmered and dried in an instant. Naruto looked up into his eyes. Don't rub it off, got it? Armin nodded again and Jiraiya put a hand on his shoulder. Listen, me and Naruto are going to see what's going on. You go find yourself a room for 3 at an inn and leave word that we will be arriving. That mark will allow us to find you easily enough. Now go. The older man gave him a light push and, seeming, melted away into the night's shadows. Armin watched for a second and then jogged off to find the nearest inn. He hoped fervently that they didn't do anything to get themselves in trouble. It would not go well for them as a whole if they did. Naruto's eyes took in the scope of the mansion. It was huge, almost the size of Hokage's tower, but not round in shape, and it had a far different kind of aesthetic. The white and brown walls, the dusky orange roof were styled with sharp corners and gave off a kind of noble feel. He guessed that was the point, though. These rich people loved to flaunt what they had. He frowned. That scent of rot and fleshly spilled blood, it didn't come from the mansion, but rather behind it. He growled inwardly and scanned the area for traps or some manner of security. He didn't see anything besides the one guard at the door, oblivious as a blind sheep to a skilled ninja. He drew out a kunai and darted across the deeply shadowed street and to the left side of the house. Then he ran along the side of the wall, following his nose as the repulsive scent grew stronger. It was disgusting, but he knew that he needed to find the source. Some feeling told him it was important. And not just the fact that there generally weren't torture facilities in residential areas, much less wealthy ones. He gripped his kunai tighter as his nose told him to turn left into the small wooded area behind the mansion. His apprehension only grew then. Under the scent of decay and fresh blood, he smelled the acrid tang and noxious sweet scent of poison. Something he was well acquainted with after raiding a few of Orochimaru's hideouts with his sensei. He hated that scent. Naruto hissed in distaste as he broke through the trees on the other side of the woods, and stopped in front of a large shack. His eyes fell on the door, which was cracked open slightly, dim yellow light shining through. He froze as the smell of death overwhelmed him. It was making him nauseous. He quickly cut the chakra running to his nose and shuddered. What was going on in there? He made up his mind and stalked across the clearing, aware that there were 2 guards at either side of the doors. They didn't even notice as he crept directly between them and placed his eye to the door. His pupils contracted at the bright light even inside, adjusting quickly. What he saw made him sick. Inside there were 2 blonde women hovering around a girl. Her hair was long and dirty, once a glossy black. It had faded with neglect and filth. Her skin had probably once been fair, but was now yellowed and purple from bruising, where her skin wasn't torn and red, crusty with scabs. His eyes trailed down her nude form. She was chained by her wrists to the ceiling while her ankles had been tied as well, stretching her painfully. Even now Naruto watched as the younger of the 2 blonde women, little older than a girl, used a small razor to cut lacerations in her belly. Blood poured out of the deep slashes. The red seeped, dripping down her body, overwhelming even his unenhanced senses at this point. The iron and rust, salty taste in the back of his mouth was overwhelming. What they were doing to her was wrong. It would end now. Without a sound, Naruto was inside the room, the doors opening wide. Behind him 2 shadow clones disposed of the guards. He had no mercy for them. If they had any conscience or good in them, they'd risk their jobs to bring this to justice. As it was, they shared just as much guilt for letting it continue. Naruto felt like nothing more than death incarnate as he strode into the room, silent as the death god himself. His blue eyes were cold as they fell on the 2 women. The elder looked up as he approached her pretty face, registering surprise a split second before he nailed her hand to a table with his kunai. At the same moment he slapped a seal over her mouth that he had in a quick-use seal on his wrist. Her scream was instantly silenced as Naruto turned his attention to the younger girl. Her blonde hair was flipped to one side of her face as her head whipped towards him. Naruto's hand caught her by the throat. Her eyes flew open wide and she choked. He calmly, effortlessly, twisted. Then he dropped her, letting her corpse fall to the floor in a heap. His anger would not allow him to let her live a moment longer. A moment behind him made him spin. He deftly caught the surgical blade that had been aimed for his neck and, staring into the older woman's eyes, snapped her wrist. She let out a silent scream and fell to her knees. Naruto sneered at the pain he was inflicting. She had no right to cry. The tears that suddenly welled in her eyes made him growl. Pathetic excuse for a woman. Who do you think you are to torture someone like this? He gripped the corner of the seal covering her mouth, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. The guards outside are already dead, and if you scream, I'll do the same thing to you that you've done to her, but trust me, I can make it last longer. She gasped as he ripped the paper off her mouth. Who? None of your business. I am someone who's found out what you've been doing. That and how you're going to help save this girl's life is all you need to worry about. Naruto pointed at the chain holding the girl and sent a tiny wind blade at it. As the razor of air severed the chain, he made 2 clones, which caught her gently. Naruto turned his gaze back to the woman. Let me be extremely clear. I don't care who you are. For what you were doing to her, you are the trash of humanity and you're lucky I'm undercover, or I would have dragged you straight to have you hanged. I will kill you, got it? But unless you do your best to heal her, I'll make sure you go down slowly. His gaze drilled into hers. Understood? No, kill me, brat. Naruto scoffed. One hand lashed out and broke her nose, sending blood sheeting. He had no patience for this creature masquerading as a woman. People like her needed to be removed from existence. Easily arranged. I'm not some brat either. I'm not going to tell you a second time. If you've poisoned her, then administer an antidote. And don't think you can sneak anything past me, bitch. I can tell when you lie and smell when you are trying something underhanded. She scowled. Why should I help you if you will kill me either way? Do I look like an idiot? Go to hell. It's not whether you die or not, it's how long it takes. He cracked his knuckles. Not that it matters. I told you that I wouldn't tell you a second time. I'm not wasting my time waiting for her to bleed out. Naruto pointed his finger at the center of her forehead. Mini air. Bullet. PHFT. Red splattered the ground and wall behind her as she toppled to the ground. Naruto spat on her body before he nodded to his clones. Do what you can until Jiraiya catches up. They nodded back and began to go over her wounds with a critical eye. Naruto turned away and examined the rest of the room. There were corpses hanging all over the place, like pigs in a butcher shop storeroom. Orochimaru's hidden bases had nothing on this place. Where he had done his work for experimentation, making himself and his servants stronger, these two had been doing it out of enjoyment. They were evil beyond the standard definition. He could tolerate torture. He was a shinobi. It may have taken a year for Jiraiya to drill that into his head, but he could stand it now. What he couldn't and refused to ever put up with was this. Those who tortured others in this way for nothing more than their own sick enjoyment. In his short time with the Sannin, he hadn't encountered many who were like this. Rapists, murderers, and the scum of the world, sure, but this? He didn't see this too often. It was disgusting and made the bile rise in his throat just to look at it all. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the racks. If he didn't have more self-control when it came to this kind of thing, he'd have already put this place to the torch with one of his bigger fire jutsu. Either that or turned the whole place into a pile of splinters with wind, not that it would help anything. It was just a way to vent his frustration. Shit like this wasn't supposed to happen. The law was tasked with upholding order and peace. And this butcher house was most certainly against order. This was just carefully hidden carnage. Holy shit, Gaki, this is the worst I've seen since my time helping the Kiri rebellion. Naruto turned at Jiraiya's voice. The older man was looking around with a grim expression. Hey sensei, this girl here is alive, but she needs toad oil to treat her external injuries as fast as we can. Otherwise she'll bleed to death before we figure out what's wrong on the inside. Got it. Naruto walked away from Jiraiya, who was already summoning one of the toads to fetch the healing oil. He stepped between the racks and cages, looking for signs of life among the dead. It wasn't long before he found some. Across the room, in a cage, was a young man. Naruto guessed he was about his own age, but frail and starved. Hey, are you awake? Naruto grasped the boy's hand through the bars of the cage. Wake up. The boy seemed to stir slowly, his eyes drifting open. What? No, don't touch me again. He leapt back from the front of the cage, only to see Naruto instead of his jailers. Wait. Who are you? My name is Naruto. I killed the two women who were here torturing people. Give me a second and I'll have you out of there. Naruto nodded to him as the boy's shocked eyes locked onto his. The blonde closed his eyes briefly and then funneled trace amounts of wind chakra into his fingertips, sharpening the blades until they would cut through almost anything. Then he swiped at the cage bars, high and low. They fell apart with an iron clang. Come on. I'm looking for survivors. We already have the girl down from over there. Do you know if there are any others that are still alive here? No, he muttered half-heartedly. We're the last two. Can you answer a few questions then? He looked up. The dark circles under his eyes were so pronounced that to Naruto they looked like black coins. Yeah, you saved me. I'll tell you anything you want. Naruto cut to the chase. Who else is involved with this? What is their scam and who needs to die? The guards are all involved. That girl lures people and travelers in. Offers them a place to stay for the night, then drugs them and brings them here. Me and Seo were separated from our friend Tatsumi. He had all the money and we had all the food and supplies. When we came here we couldn't buy a room for the night and ended up meeting that bitch. She took us here and let us stay for dinner. They drugged our food. Was she poisoned? I can smell it on the air, but I don't know what it is. No, not yet. He coughed loudly and covered his mouth. Blood soon dripped between his fingers. They were saying that they would do it tonight, and then make me watch. Naruto nodded. I'm glad I made it in time, but who else do I need to kill to make sure this doesn't continue? He growled out the last part, making it clear those left responsible were going to suffer. The woman's husband, the guards, I don't know who else. A man came yesterday, but he didn't do anything, except talk with that woman. He left and I never caught his name or face. Good. Now how are you hurt? A wet chuckle made the boy's chest heave. Every possible way I can think of. Just help Sayo first, okay? I can handle the pain. Naruto smirked. No need. Let me help you over to my sensei. He'll get both of you healed as best we can for now. Then it'll be time for me to go take out the trash. By the way, what's your name? Ieyasu, my friend over there. Is Sayo. Got it. Naruto put his shoulder under Ieyasu's arm so he could support the other and walked across the room to where Jiraiya was already tending to the girl. He then let the boy lay down on the cool stone floor as Jiraiya smoothed the special toad oil over Sayo's wounds. Already they were healing, which was odd because usually only he healed that fast with the oil. Sensei. How is she doing? Jiraiya shook his head. You can't tell. The oil is working faster than usual, not sure why, but I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Fine, but as soon as they can be moved, we need to get out of here. Right. I'll leave torching the place to you. Naruto growled his thanks and bent to tend Ieyasu's injuries with his sensei. I'm only 16 for fuck's sake. I'm not supposed to be saying that I'm too old for this shit. Jiraiya shook his head. Naruto, no matter how old you are, you're always too old for this. Now, stop being so pissed and help me. Right. Naruto was awake in bed long after Jiraiya and Armin, along with their two guests, had been asleep. The events of the night were nagging at him, along with a few other things that refused to put his mind at ease. For one, he was furious about what he'd heard from Armin that such things were ignored by most of the higher-ups in the capital. How could they ignore that shit? It was happening right under their noses and they couldn't rightly allow it to continue. But then again, it gave credence to Armin's original story about the capital being corrupt to its core. He really wanted to go to the guards after that and report everything, but common sense and a healthy sucker punch from Jiraiya settled that down quick enough. But it still left him feeling hollow. All those people who would never get to achieve their dreams, lured away by that evil family. He had half a mind to send out a couple cousin clones to do that damned guards' jobs for them. Maybe he could give a whole new meaning to the term vigilante. After a few dozen of those corrupt officials and their hateful benefactors were hanging from their necks in the street, maybe the capital's government would sit up and rule their fucking country. And yet, again, that was what Armin wanted them here for. In his mind, the capital's government was already too far gone. He wanted them to save his home, by any means necessary. And Naruto was just beginning to see just how big a task that would be. Originally he'd thought they were going to a village like one of the 5 big ones back home. They'd take out a few bad guys and maybe call in reinforcements if some bigger threat showed up, but now that was a ludicrous thought. The capital was so massive that he could spam clones all day and all night and not see it all. He doubted even the most experienced street urchin or the oldest guardsman could even memorize a fourth of the massive city. It wasn't like Konoha. Konoha was a city that was called a village. The capital was a landscape, that was called a city. It wasn't so much a city as a terrain. A geography. How were they supposed to deal with the root of corruption here? He'd need to go full Biju mode just to make any progress. The task, which had a week ago been exciting, now seemed daunting. And that wasn't even the only thing on his mind. No, he had so many other things to worry about. Of course there was the old one. The Akatsuki was still after him, and if they chased after him then he'd have to fight them with guaranteed no backup. And also there was his training with the Kyuubi's chakra. He still hadn't mastered the demon's power and it was starting to wear on him. How long would it take for him to be able to use the Kyuubi's power as Jiraiya said his mother could? And then there was Esdeath, the woman of his dreams, literally. He still couldn't stop thinking about her. Even now, consumed by other things, she lingered in the back of his mind. The very fact that his thoughts had turned to her, conjured her image, granted he'd only seen her twice. But as he'd realized before, he simply couldn't forget a single detail. It was as if his brain refused to surrender the clarity of her mental picture to time. The curve of her lips evoked a feeling in him that was so hard to ignore. He wanted to hold caress, kiss, nibble, bite, everything. He wanted to run his fingers through her bright sapphire hair, mark her pale shoulders. Every night he dreamed of that and so much more. If he didn't meet her again, either in that special dream or in real life, he was sure he'd go crazy. Naruto growled into the softness of his bed. He just wanted her. Was that too much to ask? But it didn't seem to matter. It seemed that every time he went to sleep he was just tortured by visions of what he could be doing. And then both times he'd actually been with her in what he was starting to think was a connected mindscape, he'd been woken up. It was so infuriating that he almost wanted to kill Jiraiya that second time. His chest ached when he thought of what she'd been about to say to him. Arrggg. He hissed and forced himself to relax. There was no point in agonizing over it. He'd just have to wait, as much as it annoyed the ever-loving crap out of him to do so. His eyes closed and he willed himself to fall asleep. Ooh. Naruto. Naruto's eyes snapped open at the voice and he was sitting up an instant later. He looked around. Yes. He was here. This place was where he'd met her twice before. He didn't see her immediately, so she must be. Suddenly he was tackled to the side by someone. Oh, he knew who it was. His head turned and his eyes alit on her perfect skin and blue eyes. She was smiling, grinning, her face blooming red even. Now. Naruto's death. He was cut off as her lips slammed against his without warning. And that was all it took. Hands were set loose to wander as he pushed back, tasting her lips. They were like flower petals, so soft. Naruto felt his self-control disappear then. Before another second passed, her cool hands were crawling up under his jacket and shirt. Her tongue asked permission and he gave it. Naruto groaned as he was levered back. She straddled him as his hands found her toned belly, scratching along it with long strokes. Her muscles quivered under his touch, sending his restraint out the window. He broke the kiss, much to Esdeath's obvious displeasure, only to kiss her neck, nibbling down to her collarbone. Esdeath's moan spurred him further as he bit her throat softly, marking her with his sharp canines. Every time he did so, her fingers would scratch across his chest and her legs would tighten on either side of his hips. Naruto groaned as his growing erection strained. Esdeath evidently noticed because she started to grind down slowly. Her face lowered to his as he left off her neck. She was very red, her cheeks and neck painted crimson. At the same time her hands had retreated, now simply resting on his lower abdomen. She panted quietly, attempting to get her breathing under control. Naruto reluctantly did the same, but found himself unable to dull his excitement as she never stopped grinding. They stayed like that for a moment longer before he managed to speak, somewhat out of breath. So, how were you? She took a deep breath and pushed forward to kiss him with as much passion as she could muster. He accepted it, his member throbbing hard with the beat of his heart. Meanwhile he dropped his hands from her belly, to the floor and levered himself up. Esdeath stayed like that for a second and then pulled back, her lips reddening from the force of the kiss. How do you think I've been doing? I can't stop thinking about you and I can't concentrate on anything. She bit her lip and leaned forward again, kissing him lightly. Naruto returned it, savoring the contact. His heart beat faster as Esdeath's tongue darted out to lick his lips. How about you? He chuckled. Same here. You can't imagine how happy I am that we met again tonight. Oh, I think I can. Naruto groaned as Esdeath gave another enthusiastic grind into his crotch. But we have a lot to talk about. We don't know when we will be interrupted this time. Sorry, he sighed. It's been my end both times. The guys I'm traveling with have been warned though. Good, Esdeath practically purred. Now, where are you? The capital, a small inn on the west side near the residential district. It's called the Winking Wyvern or something. Naruto saw her eyes light up with excitement at his words. Are you in the capital? Too. Yes, she cried, leaning in for another deep kiss. It kept them occupied for nearly 3 minutes before Naruto broke it off. He made a mental note to beat the living shit out of Jiraiya for delaying this more than a week. The old man really had it coming. So, where are you? The Imperial Palace. But, I can be out in the city tomorrow early. Esdeath's smile was at once aroused and predatory. Where can we meet? Naruto shook his head. Don't know, I've never been to the capital before. You know better than I, but I could ask for directions. I just don't want my traveling companions to see you yet. She frowned. Why not? He sighed as she stilled and leaned closer, her nose less than an inch from his. Listen, Esdeath-chan, I'm not from this country at all. I can honestly say that I don't know what I wouldn't do for you at this point, but it's all so sudden. We understand this attraction, but they might not. Besides, I'm part of a military that's probably going to be opposed to yours in the near future. I see, not a problem though. Naruto inhaled her scent as she spoke. Then asked, why not? You don't even know what country I'm from yet. Because I have no connections in the capital that are worth keeping. There are things I enjoy, but none of them do I absolutely require the capital for. Esdeath's eyes focused on him more strongly. I find myself unable to think of doing anything other than, her blush deepened even further, being with you. It doesn't matter. She placed one finger to his lips. I am sick and tired of things getting in the way of me meeting you in person. And the gods have mercy on the soul of any living being who gets in my way now, so, Naruto, please meet me at Brill's blacksmith. Tomorrow. It's on the north side of the capital and any guardsman worth his commission can point you in the right direction. He nodded. Will we speak there or go somewhere else? Naruto captured her lips briefly before whispering in her ear, I would like some real private time with you. Esdeath moaned in his ear, is that a promise? It is. He grinned, and you should know, I never break my promise without an incredibly good reason, if that. I'll keep that in mind. She shifted in his lap again and pouted. So, now that our meeting is secure, tell me a bit about you. Since you already know what I am, I'd like to know what my future husband does for a living. I kill people. Esdeath started grinding again. More specific. Another groan escaped him as she wrapped her arms around his neck, using the leverage to increase the pressure. Fuck, I'm a member of Konohagakure's military, the country across the sea to the west. I'm pretty low ranking right now, only a genin, but I haven't had a chance to get promoted yet. I'm still technically on a training trip with my godfather. We call ourselves Shinobi. Shinobi? Naruto nodded. You would call us an entire country ruled and governed by assassins, defended by assassins, who war with other assassin villages. Except when I say village I mean more cities. Kinda like the capital's way too damned big to consider a city at all. How interesting. Esdeath's lips found their way to his again, meeting his softly. Again he didn't even try to pull back, actually pressing forward to deepen the contact, but after a moment she withdrew, her eyes resting on his. Assassins formed a government? That must be interesting. It's kinda normal actually. Only a few of us really fit the definition of true assassins anymore. I'm what's called a ninjutsu specialist. And that is? Someone who focuses on powerful elemental attacks meant to devastate large areas. He grinned. I'd like to think I'm probably the most suited to ninjutsu in my whole village. I was born with a massive amount of energy to draw from. Esdeath smirked. I can feel that. You radiate power. It's addict NG in more than one way. She kissed him again, trailing down to bite at his neck. Her voice warmed his skin as she asked, so why are you here in the Empire anyway? Naruto groaned, pushing Esdeath away and down. She looked up, suddenly finding him on top. Her lips formed a sultry pout. Ah, I like being in charge. Hey, me too. He growled low in his throat as he cupped her thigh with his hand, running up to her firm rear and squeezing. Then he smoothed over to the center of her belly, scratching as he went. I can't believe how good it feels to touch you like this, and you let me do it. Why not? I fully intend on making you mine, but that works both ways, does it not? Her finger drew down from his back to rest over his solar plexus. And I get the feeling you aren't the submissive type. Am I right? He chuckled, stroking up towards the undersides of her breasts. Good intuition, Esdeath-chan. Chan? A term from my country. Used for boys referring to girls usually. You're my girl, aren't you? Esdeath's face bloomed a deeper shade of red at his words, even as she wrapped her legs around him. Do I have to repeat myself? You are mine and vice versa. Naruto's face descended till it was barely an inch from hers. Good, I don't think I could stay away from you now. He dipped his head, kissing her milky white shoulder and then biting her. His sharp canines left her unblemished skin marked red. I still don't know why this even feels like it is, but I can't seem to care. I just want to do it in the real world. This stupid dream is so goddamned tempting. She nodded slowly, but her eyes had gone unfocused. Esdeath shifted under him, responding to his actions. Don't you dare stop. Why would I? Naruto kissed her again, taking her lips between his teeth and sucking on it. Death almost purred as he released it and kissed her again, hard. Jiraiya frowned slightly as he observed his student. Naruto was lying in one of the beds they'd rented for the night in a local inn. This wasn't disturbing or strange in and of itself. It wasn't as if they didn't sleep in a good inn every chance they got. After all, being a shinobi was hard enough without having to sleep in the woods. What made the act of sleeping strange in this case was how active Naruto was. The Toad Sage scratched his chin in thought as he watched Naruto toss and turn. He hadn't stopped rolling over and adjusting himself for at least a half an hour. That was odd. Jiraiya had always known Naruto to be a heavy sleeper. Nothing short of a brick to the side of the head would wake him up sometimes. And he rarely stirred. So, this restlessness was very unusual. But that was really only foreshadowing. What really alarmed him was what Naruto was muttering in his sleep. Or more to the point, the name he was muttering. Death. Jiraiya's brow furrowed even more. What was going on? Naruto had been acting strange for a while now. Ever since the boat ride across the sea. It started out as him being a little less observant. And then it degenerated into outright listlessness. He wasn't even paying attention to where he was walking half the time, eyes focused inward. Plus his temper had been going downhill fast over the last 10 days. Now, Jiraiya knew that Naruto, unlike how most understood him, had a very short temper. He just masked his anger exceedingly well. So when Naruto threatened him with ripping his balls off and feeding them to him, it came as a bit of a shock. Sure, Naruto threatened him, sometimes several times a day. But he'd never made a threat like that and at the same time been completely serious. Naruto abruptly rolled off the bed. Thump. Jiraiya's eyes widened and he quickly shined out of the room and back to his bed. He would ask Naruto about his odd behavior tomorrow, when there wasn't a chance that his student would try to kill him. Blinking awake, Naruto found himself peering under his bed from the floor. His mind was blank for a few moments, attempting to process this latest interruption. Why couldn't he just be left alone to sleep for an hour? Why was it that when he had an actual dream about death, he would have the full 8 hours, but when he was speaking to the real one, it never lasted more than a few minutes? Granted, this third time seemed to be the charm and he'd been able to spend. But he had no idea how long it had been since he fell asleep. Time was quite forgotten when he was there with her. The last thing he remembered was death moaning into his mouth as he kissed her. Fuck. Naruto sat up, growling as he scanned the room. There was no sign of anyone else. The door was closed. Well, so much for carrying out his threat to his sensei. Naruto rubbed at his neck where he could still feel the phantom touch of lips. Damn, now he couldn't even beat the shit out of anyone for waking him up. After all, he'd woken himself. He stood. Instantly his sharp eyes noted the depression in the leather seat of the chair, which was slowly rising back into place. Almost as though someone had been sitting there a moment ago. Naruto blinked and a feral grin spread across his lips. Someone had been sitting in his room. Someone who was going to be in a lot of pain when they woke up. Of course, he couldn't know who it had been. Armin or Jiraiya. Armin made more sense though. After all, Jiraiya knew he was serious about his earlier threat. So it probably wasn't him. But he couldn't be sure, so he'd just have to punish both of them. Not as severely as he initially planned for this situation, but still enough to instill a real sense of fear. Oh, fuck it. I don't give a damn. Naruto laid back down and closed his eyes. He would get back at them another time. At the moment he was more interested in thinking about his meeting with death the next day. Jiraiya and Armin's reckonings could wait. The following morning, Jiraiya let loose a mighty yawn and stretched his arms out to each side of the bed. Well, to be more precise, he tried to stretch his arms out. What happened instead was he opened his eyes, tilting his head up to find himself, bound hand and foot, a meter in the air. Ropes, secured by kunai in the room's walls, kept him suspended in the air. Jiraiya was momentarily alarmed until his eyes adjusted to the light coming through the window. He then saw the note that was suspended about 2 feet in front of his face on ninja wire. He squinted to make out the writing. Jiraiya, if you are reading this, it means the sleeping potion I made has finally worn off. You are currently suspended 1 meter off the bed, bound with that chakra-absorbing rope you love so much. The bed under you is strapped with kunai and razor wire. If you move too much, the kunai will pull free of the walls and you will fall on the kunai. At the same time, if you channel chakra the explosive tags that are stuck in your underwear with go off. Feel free to help Armin when you get free. He is in a similar position, but seeing who he is, you may not have much time to get free. Good luck. P.S. I will be going out into the capital to scout today. I'll send a messenger toad if I learn anything. Also, any expenses incurred by the explosives will be on your tab. Naruto Uzumaki. Jiraiya groaned and let his head drop slowly back. A few seconds passed. Then he heard the shouting from the room over. Sweat broke out on his brow. Oh shit. Naruto sighed, a 10,000 kilowatt smile upon his face. He strolled down the streets of the capital with his hands in his pockets and S-death on the brain. He simply couldn't imagine being happier at that moment, or at least not until he met S-death in person. Right now it was about 10 in the morning. The sun shone high in the sky, casting its bright rays upon the capital. Naruto thought it looked like one of those amazing paintings that people did completely from memory. The city was a landscape, rolling hills of buildings and parks abounded. It was beautiful. And it also smelled, which annoyed him more than he was willing to admit. His sense of smell, which was much keener than the average human, or even the average shinobi, was registering the taint of the street-side gutters and the unpleasant scent of civilians emptying their trash. It didn't help that he could hear the disconsolate mutterings of civilians walking past him. It didn't seem as though most people were nearly as happy as he was. Naruto imagined that this was a sad thing. Wouldn't it be great if everyone could feel how he did right now? Going to meet someone like S-death, he let out another sigh and commanded his eyes to search out a guardsman as soon as he could. Currently he was heading north, although he had no idea if this was the right direction to find the blacksmith's shop that S-death directed him to. But she did say that any good guardsman could point the way. So first things first, he needed to find one. And about 10 minutes later he saw one. It was an older man dressed in fashionable, yet oddly flimsy-looking armor. Naruto spotted him even as he jogged out of an alley and into the street. He could also hear the sounds of a commotion coming closer. Thinking to get the information he needed before whatever conflict approaching them arrived, Naruto darted over to the man. Hey, I was wondering if you could tell me where to find TH. Whatever he had been about to say died in his throat as he heard the frantic scream of a small girl. His head snapped to the side just in time to see 6 more guards dragging 2 girls out of the alley, their arms bound tightly behind them. Naruto instantly recognized one of them from the posters liberally scattered on almost every message board he's seen since he left the inn. The other looked to be no older than 13 with cherry red hair and a badly bleeding gash on her forehead. Naruto's eyes took in the scene with startling clarity as he realized what was happening. The older of the 2 girls was beautiful with long purple hair and somber eyes. Although her looks were marred by the shattered pair of glasses that had been jammed into her face, leaving the bloody imprint of the metal rims. She was a member of Nitrade. She was one of the people listed on the wanted posters, and, although he hadn't caught her name, he guessed she was one of the people Armin had mentioned to them. About now he was wishing he'd paid more attention to what they talked about, instead of daydreaming about S-death and ignoring useful need-to-know information. Obviously she had been caught and was being dragged to whatever counted for a prison here. Obviously this was not good for him. The very fact that there was a 95% chance that he and Jiraiya would be fighting the Empire at this point meant they needed Nitrade's cooperation. And Armin already told them that he could contact the rebellion, and through them Nitrade. Which meant that he couldn't afford to let her be captured. If she was captured she would likely die, but if he saved her then it might allow him and Jiraiya to contact Nitrade without having to go through his other contacts. That would be a big help if they could cut to the chase and meet with the frontline fighters first. Naruto growled low in his throat. He didn't want to take even this much time away from meeting S-death, but the benefits to the operation far outweighed the few minutes he would need to save her. After all, this might be a favor he could call in later if they needed it. As a shinobi he knew how valuable a debt like that could be. So he simply couldn't afford to let her be captured. S-death would have to wait just a little bit longer. Sheil grunted in pain as the guards hauled her along the street. She didn't know what had gone wrong. One moment she'd been taking out the target with her bare hands. She couldn't take her scissors since they were too well recognized, and then the next moment the man she was killing decided to use some unknown martial arts on her. At first she was put off guard when she suddenly couldn't land even a single hit on the guy, and then she felt a fist like a steel ingot crash into her throat. Her ability to breath was instantly cut off and she fell back with a gasp. He was on her a split second after that, and before she even realized it, she was captured. It was a good thing she brought backup this time. Leonie had come along, and thank God, Akame as well. With those two trailing them, there was no way she would get killed. At least as long as Leonie and Akame managed to get an opportunity to rescue her. But for now she had to play the part of the defeated criminal. She hated acting like that. Sheil raised her head as the guards pulled her into the light of the main street heading towards the palace. She groaned in pain, which with how tight her bindings were, she didn't need to fake in the least. Her eyes showed her the 6 guards around her and the one in front, clearing the way, and, a blur? A sound like a blade cleaving the water rushed in her ears and everything went black. She heard a scream, shouts, and several thuds. Her panicked mind told her this was just Akame and Leonie making their move, but that wasn't what it was at all. A hand suddenly grabbed her and then an arm wrapped around her waist as she was lifted into the air. Sheil didn't shout, keeping silent, as whoever it was hauled her away at a blistering pace. She, along with her rescuer, exited a cloud of thick smoke and blasted down the street and out of the guard's sight. The city around her literally seemed to blur, details becoming indistinguishable. Before she could blink, they were 5 blocks away from the alley she was just dragged out of. The world turned 90 degrees and she barely restrained the urge to scream as the one carrying her took to the air. A scream rent the air at the apex of their leap and Sheil realized that the other girl who had been with her was slung over the other shoulder. The red-headed teen was far from silent. A second later she felt the wind rushing past her face and her rescuer landed on the roof of the building. Sheil found herself unceremoniously dropped. But in a surprising twist, her bonds had already been severed. When did that happen? She drew in a deep breath and attempted to get her bearings. She was sitting on a rooftop quite a distance from where she was captured. Beside her was the girl who tried to save her for some reason. And standing only a few feet from her was the most handsome young man she'd ever seen. Sheil unconsciously adjusted her damaged glasses and tried to get a better look at him. He was tall with blonde hair and deep tanned skin. His face bore 3 jagged black marks on either side, and as he took a breath she saw long sharpened canines. The most startling feature was his eyes. Blue as the sea after a storm, with slitted black pupils that reminded her of Leonie in her battle form. He was very attractive and had she not been in this particular situation, she might have blushed. But as it was she only stared stupidly as he scanned the rooftops around them. It required a moment before she was able to articulate a response to his impromptu rescue. "WH. Who are you?" He seemed satisfied with the state of their pursuit, if there was any, and he turned to look at her. A feral grin pulled at his lips, again reminding her of Leonie. "Oh, my name isn't something I just hand out, Assassin-chan." His grin widened. "You're pretty lucky I have a really strong conscience. Otherwise I wouldn't have broken my cover to get you out of there, Nitrate." Sheil tensed. "You know who I am?" "Well duh, your picture is pretty much everywhere. And I'm usually observant enough to notice seemingly inconsequential details hours after seeing them. A few hundred wanted posters over an hour or so is certainly enough to jog my memory. Besides, I've heard a lot about your group recently." "And where have you heard about us from, may I ask?" She grunted as she stood to look him in the eye. "No offense, sir. I'm thankful you saved me, however Nitrate doesn't need any more enemies than it already has." "Oh come on," he raised one eyebrow. "If I had any intention in fighting IGHT raid I would have let them drag you away. I only rescued you because I needed to contact your people sooner or later. You might say you got captured at a really convenient time for me." "Again, I ask where," he sighed. "You're really insistent for someone who just got their ass saved. Sheesh, and here I thought people had manners these days." He rolled his eyes at her. "Listen, just like you wouldn't tell me where your secret base is just because I asked, I can't just tell you where I learned about your organization. Suffice to say me and my allies were brought in by someone who opposes Prime Minister Honest. I saved you because we're probably on the same side." "Probably?" She frowned. "Why probably? Because my allies aren't fighting to save your country?" "My allies are worried about our own country. Let me put it this way. I come from a country that Honest will eventually try to invade once he's done taking over this continent. I'm part of a group that will ensure that he won't bring war to our home. Like I said, we aren't here to save you." We're here to help ourselves, and if that just so happens to kill Honest and bring peace back, that's good all around." He shrugged as if there wasn't any more else to say. Shiel's frown deepened. "So you're from out of the country and you're here to make sure Honest doesn't take over your homeland as soon as he's finished conquering everything around the Empire?" "Basically. And, you would consider working with Nitrate?" "Yeah, I mean from what I've heard about you, your group isn't the most powerful. I could probably kill most of your members without too much trouble, but your group has all the info we need on Honest and the Empire. Strengths, weaknesses and the like." He looked away from her, his muscles tensing with nervous tension. "Anyway, I saved you, told you why we're here, and offered to work with you at some point. That's good enough for me right now. We'll find a way to get in contact with you some other time. Right now I'm meeting with someone, she's probably waiting for me already." Shield tilted her head as he cursed under his breath and paced to the edge of the roof. "Who are you meeting?" He didn't answer. "Could you at least give me something to call you?" He turned back. "Well, let me think. How about this? You can call me Kitsune." "Fox." "What? You got a problem with that?" "No," Kitsune sighed. "I'm taking off. Good luck." Shield blinked and was about to call out when he suddenly paused. "Hey, do you know where Abril's blacksmith is?" "Sure, it's in the north sector of the city. You can find it if you follow Emperor's Way all the way to Enderun's Square. The smithy is on the left when you get there." She raised an eyebrow. "Why are you going there?" "That's the place that outfits all the guards in the north sector. Didn't you just kill a bunch of guards?" "Kill? No, I just knocked them unconscious. As for why I'm going there," he smirked. "I have a date with the most beautiful woman on the continent. And I'd hate to be late, she'd probably turn me into an ice statue." He grinned, waved, and without a sound, vanished from sight. A second later Akame and Leonie touched down on the roof. The big blonde rushed over. "Hey Shield. Who was that? What was he doing? And tell me damn it if he's single." Shield craned her head up at Leonie as she answered. "Well, he told me to call him Fox. He's part of some force working against Honest from what I can tell, and, as for that last part, he's apparently going on a date right now." Leonie swore in a way to make a sailor blush. Akame walked over and knelt by the redhead, who seemed to be in shock still. She glanced back at Leonie. "You should track him down and gather intel. I will help Shield get out of the city." "You got it. Time to crash this date, Leonie, just watch." "Ah, you're no fun." Naruto followed the direction he was given to the letter, although admittedly he was questioning whether or not it was a good idea to mention where he was looking to go. What if that girl sent someone to spy on him? That wouldn't be good, at least not until he sorted everything out with Esdeath. Once he did that, he could take her back to meet Jiraiya and Armin. That at least would allow them to pull together some sort of plan to deal with the Empire. He just hoped that whatever plan was made, he and Esdeath would be able to remain close. Just being separated from her was torture at this point. He still didn't understand it, maybe he wasn't supposed to. But the idea of Esdeath being away from him for any extended period of time seemed unacceptable in his mind. It was abhorrent, uncool, and completely out of the question. She was his and he wouldn't allow anyone to tell him they couldn't be together. He didn't give a damn if she happened to be a general of the Empire or not. "So, let's see, where am I?" She said to go to the square and it would be on the right, I think. Naruto hummed to himself as he glanced around what he correctly assumed was Enderun's Square. It was a bit crowded here for his liking. He always imagined that he would meet Esdeath in a secluded area, maybe in a forest. But now? Abril's blacksmith was a busy destination and obviously well guarded. Was his dear Esdeath thinking at all when she told him to come here? Or was she so overcome with the idea of meeting him that she threw out the first place that popped into her head? He stopped humming as he scanned the crowd. It didn't seem to him like anything abnormal or suspicious is going on. So why did he have a sudden tickle of apprehension tracing its way up his spine? And why were the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end? Naruto realized the reason a split second later. He was being watched. And not just the casual observation everyone in the city was subjected to. This was a highly focused watching, although whoever it was obviously needed someone to show them how to conceal their presence and intent. This spy, or whoever it was, he or she was just so damn blatant. Worse still, the pricking feeling was distracting him from his current objective. Naruto grimaced and continued through the crowd, throwing caution to the wind. He would be damned if he went on another detour. He was meeting S-Death right the fuck now. His eyes flicked from side to side as he moved like water through the crowded square, eventually finding shelter in an alley on the other side. Abril's blacksmith was just 2 buildings from him, and through an open window, his eyes caught a flash of blue. Pursuit was forgotten as he moved like death's shadow past the 2 guards in front of the blacksmith. They didn't even see him. He was invisible to them despite it being broad daylight. Such was the focus he had on her. Naruto cut through the intervening space like blade through flesh. And then he was there. S-Death let out a startled gasp as his arms twined around her from behind, his lips brushing the graceful curve of her neck. She tensed and looked back as if preparing to dissect him with her sword, only to freeze faster than the ice she had control over. Her eyes, so blue, met his with their slitted pupils. Naruto would remember the next moment for the rest of his life. She turned her delicate hands infiltrating his jacket, seeking out his skin and linking together behind his back. Then S-Death leaned in and kissed him. Naruto let his eyes close as their lips met, feeling nothing in that moment but her, his woman, against him. His hands traced upwards, his fingers drawing a line up the small of her back. He found her general's hat and removed it, placing his hand behind her head, and pulling her deeper into the kiss. She didn't protest in the slightest, all but moaning into his mouth. The temperature dropped like a stone as Naruto asked permission and S-Death granted it, opening her mouth to him. She tasted sweet. Naruto burned with an unnatural heat as her silken skin flowed against his. He couldn't hear the Kyuubi's shouts as he almost absent-mindedly used the beast's chakra to keep himself warm. All he could hear was S-Death, and all he could see was darkness. He felt whole, as though a piece that had been missing just fell into place. Surprise bit sharply as S-Death withdrew. His eyes fluttered open even as he instinctively held her tighter. He didn't want to be separated from her even the slightest fraction. Now that she was in his arms, it would take all of the elemental nations combined to part them. He inclined his head, looking into her baby blues. S-Death-chan? Her face was flushed and her cheeks were bright with a ruby tint. She leaned in again, whispering past his ear. "Let's go someplace private. Do my personal chambers sound suitable?" He shook his head. "Too far, you live in the palace." S-Death's already red complexion darkened. "There's a nice inn nearby, if you'd like." Naruto found her lips again. S-Death all but swooned into him, the temperature dropping so low that the others in the room fled the scene. He didn't even notice their departure. All he cared about was right in front of him. He broke the kiss reluctantly and rested his head on hers. "I would like that, and that chapter is done. Yes, finally posted. Remember, my dear fans, to review, for oft as it has been spoken by many an author of assembled fanfictions, reviews are the lifeblood of productive writing, and many a chapter was posted to a story often reviewed. So, now I leave you with this chapter and the promise of a new one soon. Chapter 4 is nearly finished. All I need to do is pass it along to my beta and then post it here. For a brief intermission, hello again everyone and happy belated 4th of July. I'm not all that patriotic, but I know there are plenty out there who are, so this is to you patriotic people. At least those who are American, since it was an American holiday. That being said, I hope you all enjoy this chapter. Granted, there will not be all that much action, but there will be a nice long lemon for you guys, or girls, to enjoy. I'd like to think it's good enough to be entertaining. I know that's not the right word for it though, so, on to the reader responses. Riddick 0011. Yes, much ass-kicking will be expected in both the Empire and the Elemental Nations, never fear. Sinnerlust. Excellent point. I'm glad someone brought that up. The Empire and the Elemental Nations aren't exclusive of each other. Just as Naruto and Jiraiya can go to the capital, the Empire could send people to Konoha, provided they could get there unscathed. Random reader. Well, how many chapters will I write? To be perfectly honest, I don't know, but judging from the plotline I have figured out, the events I plan to include, and factoring in possible changes I make or ideas that reviewers give me, I would say somewhere between 35 and 50 chapters. It will take a while, but eventually I'll get there. Not 6 Wendy. It is less that Naruto knew he was being spied on and didn't care as that as soon as he saw S-Death, thoughts of pursuit left his mind completely. Keep in mind he's been obsessing over her every day for more than a week at this point. And he's a ninja, not to mention a Jinchuriki. He's used to being followed. It would be a different story if he were attacked. 9. As you ask, so shall you receive. Guest. Yes, you can pretty much bet that there will be less. Character death. She'll will not be dying in this one. She was one of my favorite characters. Now the disclaimer, I don't own any part of Naruto or Akame ga Kill. Chapter 4. A brief intermission. In a small room deep within the bowels of the Imperial Palace, 3 men were standing in front of a door. It was small and unobtrusive, but made out of an unlikely substance, a material that would immediately place suspicion upon its purpose. Mithril, one of the 3 legendary metals, along with adamantium and etherium. This door was smooth silver, lacking anything in the form of decoration or adornment. In fact, it didn't even have a handle. The only thing that graced the front of this door was a small triangular hole in its center, just large enough to insert a finger. Other than that, there was nothing besides what it was made out of to suggest this door to be anything out of the ordinary. Well, that and the fact that it hadn't been opened in almost 1,000 years. Deep within the palace it rested, undisturbed for centuries. And now, it was ready to be opened. Excuse me, Prime Minister, but are you absolutely sure this will work? Taking blood from the young emperor, I don't think it was wise. The one who spoke was a short man with spiky brown hair and a smallish goatee. His light brown eyes looked up to examine his superior with an uneasy gleam. As much as he was excited to see this door opened for the first time since the reign of the first emperor, he was still loyal to the emperor, and taking a blood sample from his without the boy's knowledge was not something he liked. Oh, Honest retorted, surprised. And here I thought you were eager to help him. Meh, sometimes we must do things for those we care for without their knowledge. What the young master doesn't know can't hurt him in this case. I suppose that may be true. Honest chuckled. Don't worry about it, Cedric. Once this door is opened and I can confirm what lies on the other side, then we can tell His Highness. He turned to the last of their small group, a tall, lanky youth of about 18. Go ahead, boy. Open the door, would you? Oh. Of course, Prime Minister, he stuttered horribly, but complied, stepping towards the door and placing his hand in his pocket as he did so. A second later he pulled out an odd-looking object. It looked like a key, but instead of teeth it was round with no protrusions at all. Here goes nothing. He placed the tip at the hole and accepted the small vial of blood that Honest provided. This he opened and poured over the strange key. Then he thrust the key into the hole and twisted sharply. For a full moment nothing happened, and then there was a loud hiss. Intricate lines of blue fire ran up the length of the door. They continued through it for nearly a minute before disappearing completely. Then the door abruptly turned transparent and vanished as if it had never been. In its place was a small slivery bracelet with a blue sapphire lock inset in the band. Honest stepped forward, nodding to himself. So it was true. He'd been looking through the records the Empire kept on all the Imperial arms, and 2 had leapt out at him. The first was a bracelet that could transform into a shield to fit any circumstance. It could become a small shield for a soldier, a massive dome to protect an entire area, or an impenetrable door. One diagram of this bracelet had matched this door perfectly. And the second was a tiny gold key that was supposed to be able to unlock any lock in the world, or open things that had no keyhole at all. The first was obviously already in use as this door, guarding the room beyond, while the second was already in his possession. He merely didn't have someone who could use it until now. But his patience had paid off, and this unbelievably pathetic young man was able to use the Sukarutan key. And this allowed him to deactivate the door. But it required the blood of the royal family, unfortunately. So he'd had to appropriate some from the only living heir remaining. He was actually pretty lucky if he thought about it. The imperial bloodline had a rather bad habit of only turning out one male heir each generation. If one of them died, well, he wouldn't worry about that too much. At least not until he decided to have the innocent little brat executed. Then he'd take the title of emperor for himself. Wouldn't that be a nice change? Yes, it would. And the artifact that he believed was hidden behind this door would be one of the bigger steps towards his rear sitting in that golden throne. Is it okay to proceed? Cedric asked nervously. I mean, it's not every day that we find out an imperial arms capable of blocking any attack is being used as a door. Honest smirked. It's fine, I'm sure, let's go in. Cedric nodded and stepped into his room, only to shriek in pain as a white spear of what looked like a bone impaled him through the heart. Honest and the stuttering key wielder leapt back as the man pulled free of the spike and stumbled backwards, bleeding like a stuck pig. He turned around, one hand finding the side of the doorway. His eyes fell on Honest a split second before his entire body started to turn a light gray. Then, without warning, he dissolved into a large pile of ash. Honest looked through the door where the pale bone spear that had impaled Cedric retracted. It wasn't actually a spike. It resembled more of a blade, and it was connected to the hilt of a weapon. A weapon that nearly brought tears of joy to his eyes. His grin was savage as he stepped forward into the room, ignoring the pile of ash that had once been a loyal follower of the Emperor. Just as he theorized, only those of the royal bloodline or Imperial arms users could enter this room unscathed. It was perfect. Honest's eyes roamed over the weapon, laid out on a large blue cushion. It was beautiful. It was deadly. He rubbed his hands together gleefully even as he spoke its name out loud for the first time. Shiroi Megami Suen Ken, you are more beautiful than any description in any textbook. I will enjoy using you to bring me to power, White Goddess Twin Sword. Meanwhile, at a fine inn on the north side of the capital, there was a man who was pale new ivory and shaking like a twig in a blizzard. This man's name was Maroon and he had just borne witness to possibly the most terrifying thing he would ever see, that anyone would ever see, in their entire lives. General Esteth, the Ice Queen of the Empire, had just strode into his inn. But no, that wasn't the part that scared him shitless. Not by a long shot. Instead, it was the handsome young man with her, the man who somehow and seeming without effort, was able to tell her, the most powerful woman in the world, what to do, and he did it with a smile on his face. Right before he kissed Esteth right on the lips. Maroon was quite sure that there was now a demon residing within his once fine establishment. A monster in the skin of a man. For surely, what else could tempt the Ice Queen? Who could possibly control her so easily? A mere suggestion from him was accepted and returned with. He shivered, remembering her kissing him back even as they paid for their room. The power radiating off them making him sweat, the fear that coursed through his veins, the terror as the young man smirked at him, taking her by the hand and leading her away. The incredibly brief exchange had left him feeling like he was clamped in irons awaiting the gallows, even when they had no intention of harming him. Almost in spite of the fact that they were paying customers, he wanted nothing more than to have them out of his inn. He didn't want them there. Just knowing that the cold-eyed murderess and her tiger-eyed companion were doing God's knew what in the best room in his inn. It made him feel like he was suffocating. The fear was so palpable. He remembered all the stories of her. The woman who had joined the capital's army and in less time than it took to blink, had risen to the top on a pillar of power, cruelty, and ice-cold professionalism. He fervently wished that the ground would open up below him and swallow him whole. Anything was better than knowing that someone, who had defeated the entire northern army like it was nothing, was here. Maroon jumped in terror as the stairs to the second floor creaked. His eyes darted to the side as dear gods, Esteth walked down the stairs. Her uniform had been discarded in favor of a loose white button-up shirt and black pants. He tried hard not to stare. She was stunning, and terrifying, and evil. Blue eyes turned to regard him as she padded barefoot across the floor. He shrank back instinctively as she drew closer, her steps much looser than they had been. It was almost as if she was drunk. No, that wasn't it. More as if she'd abandoned her rigid demeanor. Now she simply oozed predatory grace. One hand came down on the bar with enough force to knock over a cart horse. Sapphire eyes drilled into him as she spoke. Your best wine, now. Marin's hands traveled at something approaching the speed of light as every bottle of fine wine in his possession appeared on the bar top in less than a second. Then he froze up as her killing intent dropped down on him. One more thing, bring me some chocolate, sweet, not dark. He swallowed hard and flashed into the back room of the inn, frantically searching around for what she asked for. He prayed to every god he knew, as well as several that he didn't and a few imaginary ones. That he hadn't used up all of his stock of sweets during the festival 3 weeks ago. It would still be 2 days before he received another shipment. And he knew he wouldn't live that long. Then, at last he found them.